Chapter 41 Ocean Mirror. Okay, imagine as if you were to create a repellent barrier with your tuki. That barrier should repel the impact and return it to your attacker, Iseult said while I was trying to concentrate. It had been a month since the incident with Eris. Now he had a harem and he feels more uncomfortable than they think. Ghislaine was the most surprised of all since she saw how Eris behaved with Rudeus. Plus she said she wanted to keep training, so I couldn't argue any further. Imagine that barrier is elastic, that the sword must bounce off it. Iseult said. I concentrated my tuki on my sword, but honestly I didn't have the slightest idea how to do it. Even with Ghislaine's help, it was something that was simply beyond my reach, and apparently this increased Iseult's self-confidence for some reason. I had already tried this whole month to manipulate my tuki the way Iseult indicates, and nothing has changed. I can't, I said dejectedly as I dispelled the tuki from my sword. Don't worry, even with your talent it's not something that can be learned even with a whole year of practice, Iseult said to try to comfort me. Look at me, I became a water saint at 14 and spent 6 years training until I mastered Ocean Mirror, she said with a proud smile. I just looked at my sword and the group of women sitting on the floor. Nina and Eris looked at me with apologetic smiles, which honestly made me feel worse. Also, it should be noted that after Eris joined my harem, God, I'm so embarrassed to say it, she and Nina have become closer. Now they went from rivals to friendly rivals, if that exists. Also, Nina has made progress with her control of flow, and Eris is starting to get the hang of the style. The three of us have made good progress in a short time, but there is still a long way to go, and now I spend my days away from the central dojo due to these training sessions. Today I wanted to go back to training in the dojo even if it was just for a moment. Okay, Nina, let's put your flow mastery to use, Iseult said, and Nina got up from the ground. They both got into the water god style fighting stance as they looked at each other. As always, Iseult pounced on Nina, and it should also be noted that Iseult has talent for the sword god style. The girl recently mastered the long sword of silence, and she used that technique to attack Nina. Nina used flow to repel the attack. Nina's sword was repelled and thrown aside in a quick and accurate movement. That's what I would say, but Nina's tuki control is not yet perfected. Iseult fell to the ground and with her hands she gave herself momentum and jumped to attack Nina's neck. The swords clashed as Nina tried to use flow, but Iseult's attack force was greater. Poor Nina was sent rolling in the snow by a tired Iseult. Very well, you are very close to mastering it, Iseult said with sweat on her forehead. Nina just grunted in pain in response to this as she got up from the ground. Alright, I think that's all for today. I must get back to my training. See you tomorrow, Iseult said with a smug smile and returned to the central dojo. There the three of us stayed in silence. Eris rested her head on my back while Nina cleaned the dirt from her clothes. What are you two going to do that isn't sex? Nina asked. Nin, we haven't done it, I replied while looking at her out of the corner of my eye. Ah yes, I forgot, I'm going back home. I'm dirty, and you? She said. I'll go train with Ghislaine, Eris replied. I'm going back to the dojo. I want to spar with Gull, I said while looking at the dojo building. Nina frowned at this. What's all this about? She asked confused. Well, I haven't actively trained with Gull for a couple of months and I'm afraid I'm getting rusty, I said with a smile. Okay, see you tomorrow, Nina said as she gave me a kiss on the cheek. Why, I'll see you tomorrow too, Eris said as she gave me another kiss on the blushing cheek. The two girls went in the same direction as Ghislaine is probably training near her room. I entered the dojo again. There were the sword saints, Iseult and Gull, who was sitting on his cushion. Gino? What's wrong? He said while looking at me with boredom. Nothing, I have nothing to do at home and I want to have a friendly duel with you, I said with a smile while unsheathing my sword. A devilish smile appeared on Gull's face as he unsheathed his sword in the same manner. Apparently the guy was really bored. Just because you're already an emperor and you have your harem, you think you're tough, huh? He said with a smile as he slowly got up from the cushion. And yes, Gull eventually found out that Nina wasn't the only one, but he let it go since if his daughter agreed, he did too, and it's not like he cared that much for her. Did I say that someday? I don't remember, I replied as I got into a combat stance. I let my tuki flow naturally into my sword, the way I was already accustomed to after so long. Heh, you sure have guts, brat, Gull responded with his same smile, and a fraction of a second later he lunged at me. His sword cut through the air with a terrifying whistle and closed the distance of 20 steps away in less than a second. Both swords collided with a dry metallic noise. Gull's strength made me retreat slightly, but I did not falter. Our swords separated. Gull tried to attack my neck. I quickly crouched, and with my momentum I charged at his ribs. He noticed and blocked it at the last second. Changing plans? I crouched down further, my knee on the ground, attacking his knee. But no. The bastard noticed and tried to attack my back. I made a quick jump back, followed by a long sword of light that he repelled effortlessly. As I jumped, I was slightly exposed as I fell to the ground. Gull took advantage of this and lunged at me. I let myself fall completely. Gull was on top of me, but by his own momentum he would fall in front of me. I arched slightly, raised my legs and kicked him in the stomach, lifting him slightly and causing him to fall to my left with a thud. Oog! Gull whined as he quickly got up from the ground. I was giving it my all, but Gull looked like he was having the time of his life. You fight well, brat. Gull shouted with a smile. By this point all the sword saints were looking at us intently, some in complete shock and others with envy. Iseult looked at me analytically, but I could see that she was also surprised. I lunged at Gull again at my top speed. He reacted at the last moment and our swords clashed again. But this time his guard was broken by my momentum. His left foot slipped slightly, causing him to stagger back slightly. An opening. I moved the position of my sword in my hands and directed it at his rib quickly. Gull noticed this, but it was too late. The blunt side of my sword hit his ribs and I could see that he frowned in pain. But his own sword was on my chest? No. It was moving towards my chest at the speed of light. You're the first one to hurt me since I became a sword god. You're definitely impressive, Gino, Gull said with a shark-toothed grin. And the next moment I was thrown out and crashed into a wall of the dojo, denting it slightly. At least the bastard was also considerate and didn't use the sharp side of his sword like I did. I was on the verge of losing consciousness and I could see Gull breathing heavily and holding his rib in pain. And to think that I was able to put a world power in a difficult position at my age. With this thought a smile formed on my face and I fell unconscious. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up lying on some firm muscles, a rough hand gently caressing my hair. I immediately recognized this person. It was Ghislaine. Pretending to be asleep, I approached her and buried my face in her crotch and my hands hugged her waist. Ahem. We already know you're awake. Eris's voice echoed in my ears. I looked up immediately and sure enough I was resting on Ghislaine, but around me was Eris and we were in a room that I did not know. Where are we? I asked as I looked around. My room. We heard the ruckus you made at the dojo and brought you here, Eris said with a smile. I sat up straight in bed as I remembered what happened. Gull said something? I muttered. Nothing at all, he just said to take care of you, Ghislaine replied with a smile. I see. I replied dejectedly. Don't be sad, Gull looked tired. You put him on the ropes. Eris said excitedly and I smiled. At this I allowed myself to rest again on Ghislaine's thighs and she caressed my head again. Eris grunted with a pout. Don't be jealous, you can do it whenever you want, Ghislaine said and Eris nodded blushing. I spent about half an hour in this manner until I considered it was time to leave. The next day I arrived to train with Iseult and she looked at me with respect. Ah yes, it seems that my duel yesterday must have changed her perspective of me. The duel with Gull left me reflecting. My Tuki, let it flow like a barrier. Are you ready? Iseult said as she prepared to attack me and I nodded. I've never been good at my Tuki manipulation, but I must try. Imagine my Tuki covering me, a wall, a mirror. When I opened my eyes, Iseult was only about 2 steps away from me. I didn't hear when she did the count. Instinctively I tried to use flow, but no. Let my Tuki act as a protective and elastic barrier. Return your enemy's force back to him. Use his own strength against him. 1 step. Iseult's sword headed for my rib. The sword was going at the speed of sound, but I saw it in slow motion. My Tuki. I manipulated my Tuki. It came out from my sword and combined with the air. Like mana, you use the external mana to recharge your own reserves. Convert that mana into your Tuki. A distorted image of me formed in Iseult's field of vision. She opened her eyes wide. 50 centimeters? His sword was only 50 cm from my rib, but his speed decreased? 40 cm. The sword began to go backwards. Iseult was sent flying to the ground. The poor girl rolled around in the snow several times until she stopped about 20 paces away from me. Well done, Gino. Eris's voice echoed in my ears. I just looked at my sword in shock, and I looked back at Iseult. The girl was shaking on the ground and was getting up with difficulty. This has to be a fucking joke, she declared in shock as she looked at the ground. A smile formed on my face. Chapter 42. It's hard to name each chapter, so stuff happens. Nina was kneeling on all fours on the ground with a face of total shock as she muttered something to herself. I glanced at Nina and Eris and they just shrugged. What was that? Did you just make Ocean Mirror out of nowhere? Iseult screamed as she stood up. I instinctively took a step back as I looked at her in bewilderment. Yes, I think so. You're the expert, you tell me, I said with a small smile. Iseult seemed to be looking straight into my soul with those eyes. It hasn't even been a year, and you've already mastered flow and now this, he said as he dropped to his knees with a totally devastated face. At this point I got worried and picked her up off the ground. Is something wrong? I murmured. Iseult came back to her senses as she blinked rapidly and stood up on her own. You know, Brits, from now, Iseult said almost as if she were spitting out the words as she sat on the floor. At this point, and before Nina and Eris called her crazy, she stood up again and looked at them. And you? When will you start to master the techniques? She demanded. Eris frowned at this and Nina just raised an eyebrow. Iseult, I think you should rest for today, I suggested. She looked at me and nodded, and so without saying anything else I returned to the central dojo. The three of us watched this surreal development of events. What was his problem? Eris muttered. Eris, don't be so hard on her. I heard she trained really hard to be in the position she's in, and for Gino to catch up to her in just over half a year must be depressing for her. Nina declared. I see, Eris muttered as she frowned in the direction Iseult had gone. Well, I think training is over for today, I declared as I took my sword. Nina and Eris agreed and we all returned to our homes, all except me who wandered off to Ghislaine's room. She was trained as always and when she saw me she smiled. What's wrong? It's not normal that you come to visit me at this hour, she said as she wiped the sweat from her body. I just came to see my wife, is there something wrong with that? I said with a smile. She smiled the same way as she sheathed her sword. Not at all, but I guess you're not just coming to say hello, right? She said as she approached me. I have to take care of my kitten in heat, I said with a smile, but inside I was dying of cringe. Ghislaine blushed at this and hugged me tightly. So with that she led me to her room. I always wondered why you have that ring on your tail, I said to a naked Ghislaine. Every time we did it my endurance increased, now my new record was 10 minutes. And now we were both cuddling in her bed and she had her back to me. It's just a good luck charm from my tribe, Eris has one just like it. She moaned at the end while I was stroking her tail. It had already become clear to me that their tails were quite sensitive, so I was also careful. Do you like my tail that much? She said between gasps of pleasure. Yes, I would like to caress her at any time, but since I can't, I do it in privacy, I whispered in her ear and this made her shudder. I continued playing with Ghislaine until she was visibly tired, so I returned home. When I got home nothing really happened. I had dinner and a chat with my parents showing off my new skill. I was praised by both of them and at the end I took a relaxing bath. Life is good. I lay down on my bed and rolled myself into my sheets and fell asleep. Fucking asshole, I muttered angrily. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke up I was in the same white room. Whenever I enter your dreams, will you greet me like this? The faceless bastard said. Yes, and you should be used to it by now, I said with frustration. Hey, I thought we were friends, he said with a childish pout that only made him look creepy. Why are you here, Hidegami? You were supposed to come when there will be a month left for my departure. Don't give me that shit about things being moved forward, I demanded. Wow, slow down, speedster. I just came to see you about the sink you've made of the history of the world, my friend. Hidegami said with a sinister smile. What's new, right? Don't tell me I changed the destiny of many people and that's why history changed, right? You already told me that. I said angrily. That's right, my friend. You changed a timeline that was already changed. Did you know that? Hidegami said, clapping and dancing. Tell me something I don't know, idiot. Why have you come? I demanded. Well, you're such an idiot. I want to be friendly with you and for you to trust me, and you treat me like that. Hidegami said in an offended tone. My worst mistake would be to actively trust you, I said seriously, and Hidegami's smile disappeared, which made him even more terrifying. Fucking reincarnated people and their immunity. Paul Greyrat's group just arrived in Rapam. You will move as we agreed. I just came to give you an update, he said seriously. And Rudeus? I asked. That guy is currently in the Millbots area with the counter-arrow group, Hidegami replied. Okay, everything remains the same. Hey, I have a request to make of you, I said firmly. What is it? He asked as he put his arms behind his back. You will eventually guide Rudeus to Sharia Magic University, right? I asked. Yeah, so what about that? Hidegami asked, puzzled. Be more specific with him, don't give him riddles and just tell him that Sylphie is there and give him a dream about her or something, I said. And for what? He asked in a more hostile manner. What will you lose? Roxy is your biggest fear, right? But if I go, that won't be a problem for you anymore, I told him firmly. Okay, I'll do it, he said with a playful smile. Very well, if you have nothing to tell me, then come back when there is a month left before my departure, I said. Hidegami didn't answer anything, but immediately I felt the same force push me back and I woke up immediately. I woke up strangely calm, took a shower and went out for a run. I hope that fucking asshole Hidegami keeps his word or everything will go to hell. I came home and trained with Dad. He mentioned to me in training that he heard about the duel I had with Gull and congratulated me. I had breakfast and went out to the dojo. I was strangely restless and wanted to get some stress out, so I went to Ghislaine's room. But on the way I met Eris. She saw me and smiled but continued training. So I thought, why not? And I sat down to watch her do her swings. As always, his technique is perfect, he doesn't move too much and the way he swings his sword is refined. I can proudly say that I taught her to do that. About 15 minutes passed and she finally finished her swings, dropped her wooden sword to the ground and sat down next to me leaning on me. I took the opportunity to hug her around the waist and she did not refuse. I waited for her to catch her breath so we could talk. How was I? She asked as she snuggled up to me. Your technique is perfect, there's nothing else to say, I told her with a smile and my hand began to rise from her hips to her breasts. She didn't say anything so I touched her breast. It was already big, not as big as Ghislaine's but they were still well shaped. I petted them for about 3 minutes and finally stopped. Eris never complained or said anything, although I can attribute that to the fact that we were alone. What are you doing today? She murmured as she put her face in my neck and kissed me, which made me shiver. Keep training like always, I told him a little nervously. You're a liar, you were going to see Ghislaine, right? She said while looking at me. Yeah, I muttered, you know you can do it with me if you want it that good, right? She murmured, blushing completely. And if I tell you now, would you accept? I said with a mocking smile but Eris just blushed. I guess it can't be helped. She muttered as she stood up. Without saying anything else, I accompanied her to her room and we spent about 40 minutes there. It wasn't a good experience for my hips though. Days passed, turned into weeks, weeks into months, and in the blink of an eye another step. I turned 14 and summer was approaching, and with that, my time to leave. Chapter 43 Peacock. I opened my eyes again. I was agitated and with a sweaty back. The bastard Hidegami had visited me in my dreams. He warned me a month before as he had promised me. It will be time for you to tell your family. I will come to visit you again the day before. Until then, see you. I still remember Hidegami's laughter. The echo resonates in my ears, and my blood boils. I got out of bed and changed my sheets. Then I put on my training clothes, which were getting too small for me. Now I was 180 centimeters tall. I was the same height as Dad now. and my strength had also increased. Now in addition to being a sword emperor, I am a water king. My relationships have also improved considerably. In addition to having 2 girlfriends and a wife, I have become friends with Iseult. Although I have no feelings for her, she is someone very nice. But besides that, her pride was damaged when I became the Water King so quickly, but fortunately, this gave her more motivation and now she is a sword saint. Nina and Eris' progress has also increased. Now Nina is able to use flow normally, which makes her a water saint. Eris on the other hand, although it has become clear that the water god style is not her strong point, she has improved her skills remarkably. Iseult recently said that she had the level of an advanced rank. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about Ghislaine. It seems she's stuck at the Sword King level and doesn't seem to be improving. Since her mating season is over and is about to start in a couple of months, our study sessions have been noticeably reduced. But fortunately, she still lets me touch her in my favorite places, although she's not as sensitive as before, but it's nothing to worry about. And another thing to highlight is that Gino Jr. has grown considerably. Now my little friend is 15 centimeters tall. It's not much, but it's honest work, plus my body is still in full development. Oof. Good job, Gino, my father murmured breathlessly while he was on the ground. Since that duel with Gul Faran months ago, my strength shot up again. Now I can beat Dad effortlessly, something I never thought I was capable of. And although I haven't faced Gul again, now I have the confidence that I can beat him. Yes, you heard right, my friend. You're getting old, Dad, I said with a smile while I helped him get up from the ground. It's not true. What happens is that you get stronger every day, my dad said with a smile while he dusted off his training clothes. Hey you guys. Stop playing and come inside. The food is getting cold. Mom snapped from the porch. Dad and I hurried and went inside to eat. Breakfast was the same as always, but that doesn't mean it's not good anymore. After eating and bathing again, I headed towards the dojo. It was early in the morning, the sun was just rising and the snow barely covered the ground like summer dust. I walked idly to the dojo, but something caught my attention. There was Eris, dueling with a man with a peculiar cut. He looked like a peacock. Holy shit! I shouted as I ran to stop them. It was Aubert Corvette, the North Emperor. Eris POV. I had woken up early and holding back my drowsiness, I headed to the outer training room, the courtyard of the central dojo, but there was a man I didn't recognize, a striking man. His robe was dyed in the colors of the rainbow, and underneath it he wore knee-high boots, with 4 swords at his waist. On his cheek he had a tattoo of a peacock and his hair was tied up in a style that fanned out at the top. When he saw me, he slightly bowed his head and tried to greet me. Good morning, I am the Emperor. Move. I yelled at him. The asshole was in my way and he was not in a good mood. What? The man said, immediately unsheathing one of his swords. You're in my way, I said, taking a step forward as I spoke. This man is nothing more than an obstacle and I must receive Gino when he arrives. What the hell is this creature? The man said as he got into a combat stance. At this comment, I felt like a vein had burst on my forehead and I also pulled out my own sword. You can refer to me as Aubert, the peacock sword, the man said. I see that you are a student of the sword god style. Can you guide me with the sword god? The man said in a calmer tone but still on guard. I told you to move. I yelled, now angrier than ever. I was telling him to get out of my way. However, those words were not registered by the man called Aubert. This made my killing intent increase. And at this, Aubert, with a sword in his right hand, reached for the shorter sword with his left. However, he swung his weapon backwards, brandishing the flat side of the blade towards me. At this attack distance, I decided that I would eliminate the obstacle by force. I used a long sword of light, the skill that Gino helped me perfect through practice. A normal opponent would have no hope of countering the most lethal technique of the sword god style. However, that was only if it was a normal opponent. Aubert held both swords in his hands and used them to repel my attack. I had already anticipated this by his reaction and was now swinging my sword in the opposite direction. Ah! Aubert screamed and my sword was stopped by his left hand. I used 2 hands to swing my sword, while he only used one, but he deflected my attack easily, just grazing the edge of his hair. My body followed the momentum of my sword, making me trip on the foot on which it was spinning. At that precise moment, Aubert's right hand flew towards my neck. I clicked my tongue and let myself fall on my blades on the ground. Aubert's weapon pierced the empty space where I was. I moved like a cat trying to find an opportunity to attack. Aubert kicked my sword and it buried itself in the snow. Normally this would be the end of the fight, but I didn't stop there. The moment I realized I had lost my sword, I lunged towards Aubert with only my fists. I lunged at Aubert, but he slammed the center of his sword into my cheek with enough force to break his cheekbone, but I barely dodged it and it left a small cut on my face. However, I didn't stop there. Grah! I hit his jaw with all my might. He moaned and blood came out of his mouth. But the bastard gave me a strong kick that made me roll in the snow. He readjusted the hilt of his sword and was now in front of me. But luckily for me, I landed right where my sword had landed before. My breathing was labored as I grabbed my weapon. I had to kill him. But then I felt a change of pressure in the air, a presence. Aubert also noticed it and looked in the direction it came from. The air whistled and between us appeared a tall man with brown hair. I couldn't see him, he simply appeared in front of me and stood in Aubert's way. Enough! Gino shouted. My apologies, I am the North Emperor Aubert, he said as he put a hand on his chest and bowed with a noble greeting. You must be the Sword Emperor Gino Britzes, right? In Azura there are rumors of a child who has already reached such a high level, Aubert continued with a smile. Yes. What are you doing with her? So you have come, North Emperor? Gull's voice reached me from the side and Aubert turned to look at him. Gull had appeared there without me noticing and was now standing at the entrance of the central dojo. Aubert put away his sword and Eris lay down on her back on the ground. She looked at the ground and breathed with difficulty. I quickly approached her and helped her up. She smiled at me while leaning on me. Are you okay? What were you thinking? I scolded her and she just looked away. Aubert bowed again. It's been too long, Master Sword God, he said. I read your letter, and then that girl attacked me, Aubert said as he glanced at Eris. Incredible, right? Gull said with a smile. It's the first time I've seen such an impeccable sword fighter. She was almost like a beast. So this is the girl they refer to as the Mad Dog, Aubert said as he brought a hand to his forehead. Yes, I want her to train me, and I see you've already met my star student, huh? Gull said as he glanced at me. Yes, I couldn't even see his movements even until he stood in front of me. Jaja, Aubert replied as he followed Gull to the dojo. I stayed there with Eris, while she caught her breath. Eris listened to Aubert's conversation while I held her. The way she walked was unsteady and gave her an unearthly appearance. Seeing her, Aubert readied his sword again, but Eris just glared at him and entered the central dojo. Are you okay? I said as I hugged her. Eris flinched slightly at this but nodded as she hugged me back. Yeah, that bastard is skilled. She muttered, Eris, what did we say about attacking strangers without provocation? I said as I looked her in the eyes seriously and Eris just looked away embarrassed. Eris, I murmured to her. She just blushed and gave me a little punch in the stomach. I'm sorry, she murmured. I could only sigh as I helped her up. With healing magic I cured her wounds and took her to train alone. I felt bad since Eris got up early to greet me but ran into Aubert, and I also made a mental note to help him contain his aggressive impulses. Inside the central dojo, Aubert was talking to Gull. He had already forgotten about his encounter with Eris, but the memory of Gino's presence sank deeply into his thoughts. He couldn't see their movements at all, which made him shudder with fear. Besides the way that boy treated that red-haired woman, he assumed they were close. Aubert made a mental note not to bother that boy. Chapter 44 Doubts. After all that fuss, I told Ghislaine what happened. Shortly after she visited the central dojo, there sat the sword god and his guest, the North Emperor Aubert. Ghislaine had her eyebrows slightly furrowed but showed no outward sign of paying attention to Aubert as she approached the sword god and asked him bluntly. Master, why don't you teach Eris anything? Gull listened and laughed. I already did, didn't I? How to wield her sword, you mean? Because that's what Gino taught her, she replied. No, to temper herself, he replied as if it were obvious. The normal roughness of his voice was absent. He was genuinely calm. Ghislaine didn't care much for that side of him, so she gathered what intelligence she had and chose her words carefully. You've always said it yourself, do everything with logic. Ghislaine replied a little anxiously. I said it, he replied while scratching his chin. So, what are you doing with Eris? She's out there swinging her sword every day like an idiot who doesn't know anything else. What part of that is logic? Ghislaine replied more anxiously. Since when have you become someone who complains? Gull said as he started to get annoyed. Since before I came back here, she replied, raising her voice. I see. I thought that with Gino it would be enough, so you're not going to listen to your master anymore? Gull said, now annoyed. But a sword suddenly appeared on Ghislaine's neck. To a normal person, it would have seemed as if the weapon had just magically appeared in the hand of the sword god. Ghislaine, however, could see him unsheathing it, but she was unable to react in time. She couldn't react to the fastest man in the world, not even as the Sword King. Ghislaine, you know, I kind of regret the way I taught you, Gull said angrily. You were like a hungry tiger before, but now you're like a cat that's lost its fangs. If you had stayed the way you were, you'd already be a sword emperor, not even because Gino trains you or you progressing, Gull said with a sigh. Ghislaine swallowed hard at his words. She felt like she had weakened lately, although she didn't think it was all bad. It was true that her growth with the sword had stagnated. However, she had gained important things in return: intelligence, wisdom, and a man she loves, things she wouldn't have been able to get just by mastering the sword. I'm not going to let Eris lose her fangs too. Gull put the sword away as if to say, now you understand, right? Ghislaine sulked. I don't understand. Why don't you train her personally? She said. Gull let out a sigh, remembering that she was the type of person who needed thorough explanations to understand. Listen, if someone wants to become better than me, they have to be able to figure things out for themselves. After all, that's how I got to where I am. Of course, they'll need the necessary amount of talent and hard work to deserve the title of Sword God, and only Gino can be considered worthy. But let's put that aside. Eris's goal is the dragon god Orsted. His existence defies logic. He's a monster beyond imagination, Gull said with a nostalgic look. In fact, Gull had already fought the dragon god himself, before he was called the sword god, when he was just a strong but arrogant sword saint. He lost miserably, to the point where he still wasn't sure why his life had been spared, or more importantly, why all of his limbs were still intact. After his ego was defeated, he set out to defeat Orsted and trained for it ever since. That was how he became the sword god, and it was also exactly why he didn't want anyone else to meddle in this matter. Hey Ghislaine, doing exercises isn't the same as training, you know? Especially if you have something you aspire to, there's no point in acting like an obedient dog and doing everything someone else tells you to do, right? Gull said while raising an eyebrow. Master, you always say such complicated things, I don't understand. Ghislaine snorted. Ha! Gull snorted with laughter at his response. That's right, this idiot, she won't understand if I don't explain it clearly. In other words, it means that just learning from me won't do her any good. That's why I've prepared a lot of things for her, starting with Rida and then with him, Gull said, pointing at Aubert. He lowered his chin in greeting. I am the North Emperor Aubert Corvette. On the streets they know me as the Peacock Leaf, he said with a smile. Ghislaine frowned. The man gave off an indescribable smell. It wasn't a body odor, but something strongly citrusy, probably a cologne, an unpleasant smell for a beast woman like Ghislaine. And what is someone of the North God style doing here? She said suspiciously while crossing her arms. Responding to the sword god's request that I instruct one of his students? Aubert replied with a smile. Ghislaine's expression became more suspicious. Why someone of the North God style? I don't see how your dirty tricks could suit Eris. Ghislaine said. Because the dragon god would use them against her? Gull answered calmly. The doubt on Ghislaine's face only deepened. To begin with, she no longer knew if Eris was still trying to defeat Orsted because of how enthralled she looked with Gino. Besides, she had never heard anything about the dragon god being a northern god-style swordsman. Who is that dragon god? She asked. Not that I knew. What I do know is that he has all the moves of all the swordsmanship schools in his arsenal. Naturally, that means he can use them and he will be able to counter the ones used against him. She has to learn them too, because if she doesn't, she won't be fighting on equal terms. Ghislaine's expression softened. learning the techniques that your opponent would use against you, that was logical. I see. Ghislaine said, and her tail wagged happily. Gull smiled wryly at this. Ghislaine would be satisfied as long as the answer was something she could easily understand. That part of her almost never changed. Well then, Master Sword Emperor, I hope you have a relaxing stay here, Ghislaine said. Now that her doubts had been dispelled, she knelt down and paid her respects to the North Emperor. Certainly, Master Sword King. I hope we can have a friendly relationship during my stay here. Aubert also put a hand to his chest and returned the gesture. And with that, Eris's training moved on to the second phase. For some reason, after Ghislaine came back from talking to Gull, the first thing she did was hug me and smell me? Yes, she smelled my hair repeatedly, according to her, because she had smelled something unpleasant in the dojo. I don't know how to interpret this, but I guess she shows her love that way, right? A few days later, Eris began training under Aubert's guidance in the North God style. Gull also suggested that I train with him, but I didn't want to. Honestly, I never liked that style, and with my current strength, only Gull, Rida, or Alec would be a problem for me. But that doesn't mean I hold a grudge against Aubert or anything like that. I have actually spoken with him many times, and I was surprised that in Azura the rumor of my strength had been spread for a long time and Rida confirmed it. Aubert said that he would also give his approval to this rumor. A child under 15 is already a sword emperor. Impossible to believe, right? Besides, this makes me a little nervous because I don't know what kind of repercussions it could have on me if I became so famous. But on top of all that, Ghislaine told me that I should talk to Eris about whether she will continue training to defeat Orsted, although it is practically impossible that she defeats him, but I still have to ask her. On my way to see Eris, I met Nina, who was training with Iseult. Due to Aubert's arrival, Eris has her training days divided. One day with Aubert, another with Iseult, and another with me, and so she goes. And since Iseult no longer has anything else to teach me, now only she and Nina are training. As I mentioned before, Nina's progress has been very great, and from what Iseult said, she would start teaching her ocean mirror soon. I decided not to bother him, and so I went to see Eris. She and Aubert were training outside the dojo. They were on the outskirts of the forest, and they were talking together until they saw me approaching. Oh, young Gino, to what do I owe your visit? Have you changed your mind about wanting to train with me? Aubert said with a smile. I'll pass. I came to talk to Eris, but I'll wait until they finish training, I said. Eris just raised an eyebrow and Aubert smiled. Oh, I see. That's a shame. Luckily we're almost done, so it won't take long, he replied as he turned his attention back to Eris. As Aubert had said, his training with Eris lasted for about another 30 minutes until he left. There we stayed, the two of us, so it was time to ask her. Eris, I need to talk to you about something important, I said as I looked into her eyes. She approached me while wiping her sweat. What's wrong? Is something bad? She asked with a raised eyebrow. None of that, it's something more personal. I murmured. I already told you that you can only touch them when we are alone. She murmured, blushing as she approached me. No, I don't mean that, it's about your future, Eris. I muttered. My future? What about my future? She said, confused. Well, about this, your training, you came here in the first place to defeat Orsted and protect Rudeus, right? But, now you're with me, what will you do now? I asked her as I took her by the shoulders. Eris blushed again and avoided my gaze. I want to stay with you, she murmured. Stay with me? You abandon your goal for me? I muttered as my eyes widened. Eris frowned and pulled my cheek. You should already know that, right? I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, even if it means giving up on that goal, she said while hugging me. Oh shit, I'm shocked and scared by this statement. I hugged him back as my mind was in turmoil. I see, I love you too, I replied. We hugged for a couple of minutes until I think it's prudent. When I separated from Eris, she was breathing heavily and blushing, and I have noticed that lately her lust has increased considerably, and today was no exception. Oh shit, my hips still hurt from yesterday? Before I could say anything, Eris threw me to the ground and used me as she wanted. I felt helpless. Chapter 45. Time to leave. Another month has passed. I have long since told my parents that it was time to go out into the world. My mother was still worried, but I promised him it would be less than a year. We remove the maximum of 6 months for my exponential increase in strength, since now in the entire sacred land of the sword, Gull is the only one who can rival me. Mom reluctantly agreed to this, but I promised her that when I returned I would give her lots of grandchildren. This apparently made her happy, and my father scolded me with, "I'm not too old for grandchildren." I also notified my women. Nina accepted since she was the first to know, as well as Ghislaine, but Eris wanted to accompany me. I obviously refused, arguing that her training still needed to continue. She and I fought about it, but in the end Ghislaine talked to her, and in the end Eris reluctantly agreed, saying that when I returned she would already be a sword king. I said goodbye to Iseult in the same way as the friend she is, although I can see that she is somewhat wary of me, although well, I don't blame her. I learned her techniques very quickly, and that must have hurt his ego. Still, she said goodbye to me with a smile. Tomorrow was the day I would leave. I was honestly excited. I had wanted to go somewhere other than here for a long time. This world is so vast and full of mysteries, a lifetime would not be enough to cover it all. I arrived home after my last day of long training at the dojo. Needless to say, my wives gave me a formal farewell between the three of them before I returned home. But the way Eris did it, I'll be sore for at least a week. After having dinner with my parents and taking a shower, I went to bed to sleep. Tomorrow will be a new day in my life, I murmured. With this thought I fell asleep. An uncomfortable feeling came over me, so I opened my eyes immediately and I was in the world of emptiness, a completely white space. And now what? I muttered in a bad mood while looking for the faceless being. I just came to wish you good luck as a friend, Hidegami said while clapping his hands. We are not friends, and I'm only doing this so you don't bother my family or Rudeus's, I said angrily. You hurt me with your words. And I came here to give you some advice, Hidegami said, gesturing exaggeratedly. What's that? And now what's your big advice? I said, crossing my arms. Ahem, Gino, listen carefully. When you go on your trip, head to the magical city of Sharia. Infiltrate on the magical university, heading to the library, and steal a book about the teleportation labyrinth. Hidegami said with excitement. You want me to steal the book that will be crucial to Rudeus? I said as I stood up suddenly. Calm down, buddy. I'm not saying that. In fact, you'd be doing Rudeus a favor. With your current abilities, that labyrinth would be a piece of cake for you alone. And since you're an A-rank adventurer, it won't be difficult for you to get in there, Hidegami said as he moved with excitement. Think about it. You go in there, help Paul's group, rescue Zenith Greyrat, and in the process make Roxy McGurdia fall in love with you, Hidegami explained. I don't think that's a good idea, I muttered. Why not? Hidegami asked while crossing his arms. It's just too long a trip for my estimated time. Round trip would be more than 2 years, I explained. Oh, that's it? But it's not a problem. There are teleportation circles, remember? He said, dismissing my concerns. Yes, I know they exist, but I don't know where they are, I told him. That's not a problem. You'll just use the one near Sharia. Plus you'll have help, Hidegami said. I raised an eyebrow at this instinctively. Help? From whom? I muttered. You know Jesse Nucadia, right? Well, he is also one of my most faithful apostles. I contacted him at the right time so that he could send a letter to Elinali's Dragon Road asking for help. He explained, if you hurry, the letter will arrive the same day as you. And the letter explains that you will go with her, he said excitedly as I tried to process the information. Wait a minute. Rudeus and Elinali's are already at the Magic University, right? How do you know Rudeus won't want to go when he finds out about this? I muttered. Don't worry. Rudeus is busy making his love nest with Sylphiette. I followed your request, and as soon as I arrived he stuck to that girl like gum, haha. Hidegami laughed. But that doesn't guarantee that he won't want to go, I told him. You're a airhead, you know? The letter will only be addressed to Elinali's and she will leave quietly, Hidegami replied, irritated. Then, why don't you tell Rudeus to take that book and recommend it to Elinali's and she can take it without me having to enter the university by force? I muttered. Hitagami was silent for long seconds as he looked at me. Teeth, fucker, just go to Sharia quick, he said with frustration. You didn't think it through, did you? It must have been one of those tricky tips, right? Let me tell you, that won't work on me. I yelled at him. Reincarnated people are a pain in the ass, he muttered while biting a nail. I'm sorry, my friend, it's the world you have to live in, I said while he got angry. You, just look at Greyrat. I'll tell you where the teleportation circles are. The scream, immediately I felt a force pulling me back and immediately I woke up. I woke up slightly upset, it was summer and I was sweaty, so the first thing I did was take a bath. This time I wouldn't do a training since it was my day to go out. Yesterday my father helped me buy a horse and it was in a nearby pasture. Since I had grown a lot in recent years, I didn't have many clothes in my size other than my training clothes and other clothes I bought recently, but most of them were for travel. I had breakfast with my parents. My mom looked visibly sad, but with a few hugs from me her mood improved. So after breakfast I went to say goodbye to the last person, Gul Farn. When I entered the dojo he was barely sitting on his cushion when I opened the door of the place. Ah, Gino, you're leaving already? Gul asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, but first I would like to have a little duel with you, a friendly one just to warm up, I said with a smile. Hee, if you say so, I don't see why not, Gul said and immediately lunged at me at top speed. Not even my father could have reacted at this speed, but I was already on another level. Thack. The clang of our swords echoed through the empty building. Gul grinned like crazy at this as he looked into my eyes. He immediately crouched down and tried to attack my ribs, but I blocked his sword and with flow I made him stagger slightly. With this an opening was opened. It was 1,000th of a second for the outside world, but for me it was enough. But like the sword god that he is, Gul reacted quickly. I turned around while Gul regained his balance. My sword headed for his neck at maximum speed just like Gul's to mine. Fwoosh! The sound of air being cut invaded my ears. In front of me was Gul Farn. My sword was lightly embedded in his neck. With a slight cut, a small line of blood stained my sword. Gul's sword on the other hand was above my head. At the last second I ducked as much as I could and avoided his attack. I was now out of Gul's arm range. Gul's expression was both shock and surprise. This was the first time I was able to avoid one of his attacks. Her lower lip trembled slightly, but eventually a small smile formed on her face. I only let you win because I like you, he said while forming a mocking smile. Thanks a lot for that anyway, I replied with my own smile as I removed my sword from his neck. You've become so fast, you damn brat, he muttered as he wiped the blood from his neck. Oh, you've become slower, I teased him. Don't push your luck, kid, he said in a harsh voice, but I just laughed. Gul also allowed himself to smile as he patted me on the back. I never thought you'd get this far this soon, but I always knew you were special, he said. I looked at him and bowed in respect. When you get back, marry Nina and give this old man grandchildren, he said with a smile, and I scratched my neck because of my nervousness. I eventually left the central dojo as the other saints began to arrive and was now heading back home to have my parents accompany me out of the sacred land of the sword. I told my parents and they accompanied me to the exit. I carried clothes, food and a sleeping bag in a small backpack. And on top of me I carried my savings and my adventurer card and obviously my dragon phoenix sword on my waist. Oh my baby, you grew up so fast, Mom said through tears as she hugged me. Calm down, Mom, it's not a goodbye, but a see you soon, I said while hugging her tightly. I know, but I'm going to miss you so much, baby, she said between sobs, and I could only hug her. I looked at my father and he was just smiling. My mother stopped hugging me after resisting for a few moments. My father offered me his hand for a shake, but instead I hugged him tightly anyway. Take care of yourself, son, we'll be waiting for you, he said while patting me on the back. Yeah, I'll see you later, I said as I climbed onto my horse. He was a black horse of average size, but according to my father, he had a lot of endurance. With a final glance I said goodbye to my parents and began to gallop out of the sacred land of the sword. I waved goodbye until I lost sight of my parents' silhouette and thus increased the speed of my horse's gallop. And after a couple of minutes of traveling I was surprised to see that the sacred land of the sword is on top of a huge mountain with a semi-flat top. The further I went, the more I realized how huge and majestic my place of origin was. A hint of doubt crept into me at the last minute, but I shook my head and focused on the path ahead. I had a lot to do, for my family. Chapter 46 Towards Sharia. It's been 2 weeks since I left the sacred land of the sword. I'm now near the border with Renoa in the nearest district. It is a small town with nothing special. It is slightly larger than Roa, but it does not have as many attractions as that city. But here would be my first resting point. Sharia is still another 2 weeks away, but I plan to make a strategy with my horse. These first 2 weeks, I did a normal jog since I had practically never left my town. Now, I was in new places without anyone to help me, but I was able to get through it quickly. Since those first 2 weeks were just deserted paths except for some wandering swordsmen heading towards the dojo, this would worry me in many cases. But luckily Nina is here to boost those morons up. When I arrived at the city, the first thing that greeted me was a small wall of about 3 meters and 2 guards armed with swords. As this was a border city, it was obvious that they would be cautious. "Stop right there. Identify yourself," a guard said. He was a man of about 40 years old. He had a thick beard with some gray hairs and a common sword on his waist. I got off my horse and approached them. "My name is Gino Britzes. I'm heading to the magical city of Sharia," I said. The man looked at his companion, who looked like an older man, about 60 years old, who also carried a sword on his waist. The older man nodded and I was allowed to pass. If I could describe the city with one word, it would be modest, like any other medieval city. The largest buildings were 2 stories high and were apparently only medium-sized houses. I walked a bit until I reached the local stable, where I rented a stall and rested my horse for a cost of 3 copper coins. What a bargain, right? And so I walked for the first time through this city unknown to me. I could see that some people were staring at me. Perhaps it was because of my travel clothes that were unusually black. Also, the belt I wore my sword with looked very luxurious, as does my sword sheath. Something I learned from Rudeus is that you have to keep up appearances with these kinds of things, but even so, it wouldn't hurt to show off my skills with random thieves. I walked through the streets for about 10 minutes until I reached an adventurer's guild. The noises of the experienced adventurers immediately stopped when I entered. "Look at that boy, he thinks he's tough because of his fine sword. How annoying. Do you think he's one of those sword saints from the sacred land of the sword?" I heard the murmurs of some people, but I didn't care and walked towards the counter. My goal was to exchange my money for the local currency, since I would obviously be traveling to a different kingdom, and Renoa as well as the other magical nations uses Azuran money. And I was also able to confirm my theory that adventurer guilds always use voluptuous women as receptionists. I approached the counter and called the girl. "Welcome to the 7th Region Adventurers Guild. What can I do for you?" The girl said with a smile that was obviously fake. "I would like to exchange currency," I said. "Oh, how much is the change you want to make?" the woman asked, raising an eyebrow. "All this," I said as I pulled a bag full of coins out of my robe and emptied it onto the counter. It was quite a lot. The whole stack could fit in 2 adult hands together, but I don't know how much it would be worth in Azuran currency. You might be wondering why, if this currency is not used here, why can you change it? The answer is easy. The sacred land of the sword. Every day hundreds of wandering swordsmen cross this border to go there and exchange their Azuran currency for the local currency, so they never run out of cash. "Ah." The woman muttered with her eyes wide open, and I could see that some adventurers were looking at my pile of money with malicious eyes. "I would like to change all that, please," I said to the girl. She blinked several times, coming out of her shock as she looked at me. "Weiss, let me count them," she said as she took the pile of coins. Well, what do we have here?" "That's a lot of money, my friend," a muscular adventurer said as he put his hand on my shoulder. "Besides, that seems to be an expensive sword, huh?" he said, looking at my waist. "Yes, it was a gift from my teacher," I said with a smile. Hee, be careful, boy. You don't know when you might meet bad people who would kill you just for your belongings." The man muttered, trying to intimidate me. I looked back at him as looked into his eyes and smiled at him. "I'll keep that in mind, thank you very much," I said as I looked back at the woman at the counter. I heard the other man mutter as he went to sit back down with his companions. I could hear him laughing and his gaze fixed on me. "Looks like I already have my first volunteer." Take this, the total equivalent is 3 Azura gold coins. The woman told me, giving me the coins. Many will think that it is little for the pile I gave, but just 1 gold coin can be able to feed a modest family of 4 people for 2 weeks. So all those years of savings paid off. Since I had nothing else to do here, I left the guild and headed to a restaurant. It was midday, and although it wasn't my usual mealtime, I wanted to try the food outside. So I decided to try a small restaurant where they served me some kind of combination of wild boar meat with potatoes and bigarret rice. It wasn't like Mom made it, but it was edible, at least. After finishing eating, I headed to the stable where I left my horse. Should I give him a name? How about the name Skibbity Pomni Sigma? No, it's too pretentious. I know. Patrick Bateman. Got it. Now I'm heading to find Patrick. I retraced my steps until I reached the stable and picked up my horse, so I mounted Patrick again and headed towards the exit of the city, which in turn was the border with Renoa. I galloped with Patrick for another few days until I reached the city limits. It was an open area, but to my surprise, there was a river about 3 meters wide. I guess that's the border. Stop. Identify yourself first before crossing. One of the guards said, getting in my way. There were around 10 guards, and if I can guess, they are at least advanced rank. I took out my adventurer card and gave it to the guard. The guy took out some kind of stamp and placed it in a corner of the card. You can come in, he said as he handed me my card back. The guards moved out of the way and guided me to a bridge that crossed the river. I crossed the river with my horse and looked at the city. It was fairly large, but nothing to write home about. Now I was in Renoa. Crazy, right? I had already made sure to leave the job of sending a letter to my parents indicating where I was. The reward was 2 Azuran silver coins, which was quite a lot for such a simple job. Without thinking about it anymore, I had Patrick Bateman run at full speed down the road. I had him run for about 3 hours until I saw it was time to rest. It was approximately 5 in the afternoon, so I thought I would camp here. It was in the middle of the road and it was clear, but nothing a good earthen fortress can't fix. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of footsteps woke me up. I looked outside and it was already night. Are you sure about this? That kid looked skilled. I heard a whisper from outside. Nonsense, it was probably one of those conceited sword saints. You can deal with that, right, Gerald? Or are you scared of a kid? A familiar voice answered. I recognized that voice. It was that of the bastard who spoke to me a while ago in the guild. Maybe they're trying to rob me. Luckily I'm in the dark. Quick, he's asleep. You stab him and I'll steal his stuff, the same voice answered. The 2 guys entered my earth fortress, stealthily. As it was dark, I could keep my eyes open as they approached. Ha! With a quick movement, I threw a long sword of light at the muscular guy and it quickly sliced his head off. The other guy didn't have time to react and lunged at me, trying to stab me. With a smooth movement, I took his dagger away from him and removed one of his arms with a quick movement. Gah! Bastard! The guy screamed as he writhed on the ground. I threw a fireball at the ground and lit my campfire again. The light illuminated the earth fortress, revealing a muscular man writhing in pain on the ground in a pool of blood. It was the same guy. Since it was dark, he must have killed his partner. Please don't kill me. Have mercy on me. The guy screamed as he tried to cover his wound. What's your name? I said as I wiped the blood off my sword. George, he screamed in pain. George, huh? Do you know who I am? I said as I put my knee on his neck. I can't breathe. He groaned in pain as he writhed. Okay, listen, George, my name is Gino Britzes and I am a sword emperor. I will let you live, but when they ask you who hurt you like this, you will say it was me, okay? I said as I closed the wound on his severed arm with beginner-level healing magic. Yes, I promise, he shouted. Okay, George, now get out of my sight, I said as I put my sword away. The guy ran down the road while staggering from his missing arm. I could see that he came on a horse as he got on one and headed off towards the town. I tried to go to sleep, but now I had a corpse and a human arm on the ground. It wasn't the first time I killed someone, and even less scum like this. The most annoying part of killing is getting rid of the remains, so I spent a good part of the night carrying the corpse and the remains until I burned them on the side of the road. I hadn't slept well, so I allowed myself to go back to bed, but because my body was used to getting up very early, I feel like I only slept another 2 hours. So with my tiredness, I got back on Patrick and started traveling on the road. I pushed poor Patrick to his limits, but as a reward we reached Sharia in 10 days. Now it was time to meet up with Elinali's Dragon Road. Chapter 47 The City of Sharia and the Lustful Elf. The Kingdom of Renoa, the largest country in the northern region of the central continent, with the same kind of power and influence as the Kingdom of Chiron in the south, had an alliance with the Duchy of Basharant and Neris, thus forming the three magic nations and also having close ties with the Magicians' Guild. The headquarters of this entire alliance is gathered here, the magic city of Sharia. In this city is the headquarters of the Magicians' Guild, the Magic Implements Workshop, and the Magic University. All of this was pushed into this flourishing city. If you were to look at the city from above, you would find the Magicians' Guild in its center, in the east, the student district where the Magic University is, and to the west the Magic Implement Workshop, and the heart of this was the shopping district, and in the south the accommodation district. Looking at the map of the city, I realized that the infrastructure was based on that of Milishan. I had arrived in this city in the morning and had left Patrick Bateman at a local corral. Renoa Magic University occupies a vast expanse of land. The campus was filled with huge brick buildings, including one in the center that almost looked like a castle. At the university, they have regular guys and other guys like Fitz or Rudeus, as well as adventurers who have made a name for themselves but aren't associated with the Magicians' Guild. They have nobles and royalty from other countries as well, but they mainly solicit those with incredible magic power. They tell them that they don't have to attend classes as long as the university includes them as special students. As much as I wanted to go to that place, I have to meet up with Elinali's and then travel to Begarit. Now that I think about it, how will I know where she is? Damn, Hidegami. I rented a B-rankin just to spend the night. I hope that bastard appears in my dream or I'll turn around. And that's a promise. I arrived at my room at my inn. It was the same as my room in the sacred land of the sword, so there wasn't much difference in comfort. After doing some stretching exercises, I improvised a bathtub with earth magic, and with water magic I took a shower to sleep, and that's how I fell asleep. About 10 minutes later I felt a kind of headache. I had already learned to understand this feeling. This is when Hidegami tries to get into my mind. And sure enough, I opened my eyes and I was in the now familiar white void. You arrived earlier than I thought. The letter will still arrive tomorrow, he said excitedly. Do you know what I came for, where I meet Elinali's? I asked the faceless man in front of me. Okay? Listen to me carefully. Tomorrow around noon, Elinali's Dragon Road will receive a letter from Jess. In that letter it was specified that Paul's group needs the help of Elinali's and another companion, but I assured Jessie to write in the letter that you are one of his friends. And you will also go to help your friend Jessie. Hidegami said excitedly. Are you saying that I, a friend of Jessie, will go to Begarit just because he asked me to? Instead of Rudeus? Elinali's may be a whore, but she's not stupid, I said in a serious tone. Hidegami's smile disappeared and he crossed his arms. Idiot, I'm trying to help you and you treat me this way, he shouted. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have helped you at all, I replied. She will receive the letter tomorrow and it will take another 2 days to leave. You can find her on the outskirts of the city in 2 days in the morning, he muttered in an angry tone. 2 days? I muttered with a raised eyebrow. Yes, introduce yourself by your name and say that you remember Jess and why he helped you in Milis, Hidegami replied. And how will I find the teleportation circles? I asked with a raised eyebrow. Easy, 1 day from Sharia to the south is a forest. In the middle of that forest you will see what will appear to be a cave but is actually a seal imposed by the dragon race to hide the structure, he said. Shit, Nanahoshi's map would be very helpful right now, but what can I do? It's okay, little bitch, I replied with a mocking smile. I could have sworn I saw a vein pop on Hidegami's head as he crossed his arms and gritted his teeth. And immediately I felt like a force pushed me back and I woke up in my room. So 2 days, I muttered as I looked at the ceiling. I got out of bed. I was unusually calm. Apparently insulting Hidegami cheers me up. Go down to the first floor of the inn to order breakfast. It wasn't the best thing in the world since there weren't many ingredients in this place. So I settled for roast wild boar meat with potatoes, that's all. In this country they drink a lot of tea and it doesn't taste very good, so I only drank the water that I could form with magic. I didn't have much to do since I would practically have to wait 2 days to go out again, so I decided to simply explore the city as soon as I could, since I didn't know when I would do it again. 2 days passed like this, during which I simply spent my time exploring the city, visiting all the possible places in the place, especially the Magician's Guild and the outskirts of the Magic University. I wanted to join the Wizard Guild, but it turned out that it is by membership and the price to pay is 2 Azuran gold coins, which was more than half of my current budget. So I decided to temporarily postpone joining there, although I didn't completely rule it out. Now was the day I would meet Alinalize. I got up at dawn as usual and decided to jog around the city. It was significantly larger than the sacred land of the sword, so I got tired halfway there. After this I took one last shower and left my room at the inn. I took Patrick Bateman out of his pen and headed for the edge of town. I don't know how early Hidegami was referring to, but I was already here and it's 6 in the morning. I waited for a little over an hour until in the distance I saw a woman with super thick blonde hair that reached her knees. She was dressed provocatively, and he carried a large backpack on his back. It was Elinali's Dragon Road. At first glance she may seem like a delicate woman, but in reality she was the tank of her group in her glory days and an experienced adventurer. Not to mention she's also a slut who sleeps with men every day. "Oh my God, who is this handsome young man?" the elf said in a seductive tone as she approached me. "Here we go." "Good morning, miss. My name is Gino Britzes. I'm here to pick you up and accompany you on your trip to Rapam. I'm a friend of Jasi Nukidia," I said with a respectful bow. When I mentioned Jasi, Elinali's playful expression disappeared and turned into one of doubt. "Jasi's friend, huh? Where did you meet him?" she asked while crossing her arms. "He helped me reunite with my family years ago in Milis. I was now in the Northern Territories when I received your letter and I came to find you as quickly as I could," I said with my best smile. "Yes, he mentioned in the letter something about a travel companion," she muttered as she closed her eyes and became thoughtful. "And when did you get the letter?" "My letter arrived 2 days ago and that's why I left until now," she asked me while looking at me firmly. "I was in the city of Pippin, you must know it, right? It's about 4 days south of here," I said. I see, that's why it got to you first," she said, and the smile returned to her face. I see, but you're not too young to be doing this. It's dangerous, you know," she whispered in my ear while caressing my chest. "Don't worry, miss, even if it doesn't seem like it, I'm a sword emperor," I said as I put my hand on my hip pointing at my sword. I could see how Elinalize almost laughed at this but put a hand over her mouth. I see, and you know how far Garrett is, right?" she murmured while covering her smile with her hand. "Yes, but I have a special method that will shorten that year of travel by 1 month," I declared proudly. Elinalize looked visibly intrigued by this as she looked at me. "Oh, and could I know how you would do it?" she asked. "Yes, it's in the forest a day from here, and I noticed that you are an elf, right, miss? I could use your help to find my way around that forest," I said with a smile. Elinalize didn't look entirely convinced by this as she looked me up and down. "Okay, but it better work, okay?" she said in a mock serious tone. I nodded with a smile at this and invited Elinalize to get on my horse. She sat behind me and clung to me very unusually while holding my chest and resting her head on my shoulder. "Try not to take this behavior of yours seriously and we start traveling." A few hours passed and the trip had been quite silent. "And what did you do in Sharia, if I may ask you, miss?" I asked her. I had followed a friend of mine to the Magic University. He had been there for 2 months until now, but this letter arrived. It honestly took me by surprise, she said. I could feel him leaning towards me as he said that. 2 months, huh? And you left that friend of yours at the university? I asked. I feel a little bad for leaving like this. I just let him know with a letter and I left, she said. 2 months. That's right, Rudeus is barely 15 years old at this time and is still starting his school year. And don't you have any relatives, miss? I asked her. Yes, but not here. She murmured silently. I can guess that she knows that Fitz is actually Sylphie in disguise but never told her. Just that? Doesn't you have a husband or boyfriend here? I muttered. Why am I so sexy? Let me tell you no, but if you play your cards right maybe we can have fun on this trip, she said while kissing my ear. I almost lost control of Patrick at this, but more importantly, she hasn't met Cliff yet, and apparently she won't be able to now because she's traveling. I see. I murmured. Elise just laughed and we followed the path into the forest with her hugging me. I decided not to ask him any more questions, because we are not close yet. And so, after a day of travel we arrived at the forest, now to find that teleportation circle. Chapter 48 The Teleportation Circle. During this first day of travel, we were accompanied by an adventurer who would return Patrick Bateman to Sharia. After saying goodbye to Patrick, Elise and I entered the forest. The forest is called Lumen, which in the demon god's language means stomach. This choice of words only made sense once you entered the forest. The vegetation was incredibly dense, there were so many tall and old trees that the branches blocked the sun. It was a bit of a gloomy place, to be honest. The ground was full of roots, so it often felt like you were walking on an uneven wooden floor. You had to constantly watch your steps. The large trees had much larger roots and in some places, they even formed a kind of natural staircase. It was almost like an open-air dungeon. Even experienced rangers could easily get lost in such a place. It would be too easy to become the prey of some monster. No doubt in this forest, many human bodies have been digested by this forest over the centuries. Still, this was nothing to a veteran adventurer like Elise. We were alert, of course, but calm. Elise took the lead and I followed behind at a certain distance. As expected from an elf, she knew her way around this terrain, and thanks to her excellent hearing, she warned me in advance when enemies tried to ambush us. 3 monsters at 2 o'clock. She shouted, "Understood." I replied. At the command I launched myself at a green boar just as it tore through the foliage, sending its head flying back with a splash of blood, its 2 companions immediately turning and fleeing. Elise was in charge of the search and I of the destruction, so far we had eliminated all threats before they came close to us. So far we had not engaged in any real combat, which seemed fine to me. Elise seemed to guide us around the dangerous areas where the animals congregated in greater numbers. Evidently, this was an instinctive skill she had acquired over the years and not some kind of natural elven instinct. I think I found it. This is the monument we were looking for, right? She said while looking at me with a raised eyebrow. After a while, Elise spotted what we had come to look for. It was a flat stone slab with a symbol carved into its surface, which was in front of a thick wall of vegetation. I had resigned myself to the possibility that we would be searching in this forest for 2 or 3 days, but we had managed to find it before the sunset, considering that we arrived here in the morning. The engraving on the stone looked familiar to me from the monuments of the 7 world powers. It bore the dragon god's crest, a sharp, angular pattern made up mostly of triangles. It reminded me a bit of the magical symbols when some anime character enhanced their powers, though the specific details were totally different. Maybe they were both meant to be different representations of the face of the same dragon. Is something wrong? Elise asked as she approached me. No, it's nothing, I replied. Elise had noticed me studying the symbol closely, but I decided not to pursue this line of thought. We had other priorities at the moment. I closed my eyes as I tried to remember the spell. After a few minutes, I was finally able to find the memory I needed. I'll start removing the barrier, I said. Okay, Elise said and turned around to watch my back as I worked. I placed a hand on the stone surface and closed my eyes, remembering the specific spell I was to use. The WM only lived for his ideals. No one could escape the reach of his powerful arms. He was the second to die, a dragon general, his scales green and gold, his life the most ephemeral of dreams. In the name of the second dragon emperor Sherad, I break his seal, I said. The instant the last word left my mouth, I felt mana flow from my arm to the tablet, and the world began to distort before my eyes. The air itself seemed to swirl strangely for a moment. When this happened, the thick wall of trees and plants in front of me had disappeared, leaving a stone building in its place. Wow. I've never seen an enchantment like this, Elise said, looking at the structure in amazement. It wasn't anything I'd seen before either, but the way that board had sucked up mana looked familiar to me. The thing was probably a large, motionless magic instrument. If we were to split it in half, we'd probably find a bunch of complex magic circles engraved inside. However, this incantation seemed to me to be original to the dragon god, with all the references to various dragons. That sacred emperor, he was one of the 5 dragon generals from the old stories, right? Let's get going then, I said. Okay, she replied. The building in front of us was a single-story structure. There were ivy vines along the walls, and there were places where the stones had crumbled over the years. The place looks like a basic ancient ruin, doesn't it? I said to Elinalyze as we entered the place. I've seen a few labyrinths with entrances that looked a bit like this, she replied. Oh right, you don't have any experience with labyrinths, do you? She said as she looked at me. No, none, I said, shrugging. In that case, make sure to keep a close eye on me. Just step where I do, she said, smiling at me. Sure, but I don't think this place is a labyrinth, right? I asked. Better safe than sorry, she replied. Okay then, Gino, let's go. Get ready to cover me in case things get ugly, she said. Understood, I replied. Cautiously, Elinalyze and I made our way deeper into the stone ruins. The interior was also made of stone. Here and there, tree roots could be seen peeking out from the trees, a classic forest ruin situation. Practically, however, it wasn't that big of a structure. In fact, it seemed like there were only about 4 rooms. We moved slowly through them, making sure to investigate every corner. The 2 rooms closest to the entrance were completely empty spaces of about 7 square meters. In the 4th and final room, we found some stairs that went down into the darkness. Oh God, now this seems suspicious to me. Elinalyze said she scanned the area around the stairs and checked every corner of the room. I guess stairs are popular places to set traps. Well then, I think we're good, Elinalyze said. In the end she didn't find anything. I wasn't too surprised. If someone wanted to set a trap in this place, they would probably have set some at the entrance as well. I'll go down first, watch my back, Gino, she said. Understood, I replied. Elinalyze walked down the stairs very slowly and carefully. I made sure to follow her steps exactly. Strangely, the ruins didn't get darker as we descended. The reason became clear when we reached the bottom of the stairs. Well, there it is, she muttered. There was a huge magic circle on the floor in front of us, as big as one of the rooms above, and it gave off a white and blue light. This would be the teleportation circle, then, she asked. Yes, this is it, I said. However, Elinalyze didn't seem to be in a hurry to try it out. She looked at the magic circle with a doubtful expression on her face. Is something wrong, Elinalyze? I asked. I have some rather painful memories related to teleportation, that's all, she said as she approached me. Smiling, Elinalyze took my hand. Her grip was strong, despite her thin fingers. It was the hand of an adventurer. It was also a little warm. I hope you don't misunderstand me, Gino. It's important that we are in physical contact when we teleport, she said with a smile. It's okay, no problem, I replied with a smile. Well then, let's go, she said with a smile. Let's go, I replied, and so the 2 of us jumped together into the teleportation circle. Teleporting feels a bit like waking up from a dream. Maybe I had lost consciousness for a moment. Looking to my side, I saw that Elinalyze was just as shocked. I guess we're here, I said. Well, maybe, she muttered. We were still standing in a stone ruin, just like before, and the chamber didn't look any different at first glance. However, after a few seconds I started to notice the small piles of sand in the corners, and the lack of vines on the walls. The stone was also tinted a slightly browner color. I cautiously stepped out of the magic circle. Once we were completely out of the teleporter, it started to emit that white and blue light again. It seemed ready and waiting to return us to the other side. Oh, wait, we should check that we can get back to the other side, right? Elinalyze asked. Don't worry, this will take us back to where we came from, I said with a smile. Are you sure? Already, forget it, you already knew about this for some reason, right? She said with a small smile. I just smiled at him and started walking to the first floor. As I climbed the stairs I noticed the sharp change in temperature. The air was brutally hot. At least it didn't seem too humid, which made sense if we were in the middle of a desert, as we were supposed to be. But for a boy like me who had lived his whole life in the snow, this place was like hell, and my testimony was the drops of sweat that ran down my forehead. The first floor was practically identical to the ruin we had left behind in the forest, the main difference being obviously the sand that carpeted the floors and the lack of vegetation on the walls. There were also 4 rooms here, and the layout was identical. After exploring the ruin thoroughly, we set foot outside for the first time. It was hot, very hot. The word hot, to be honest, was inadequate. The wind hurt my face. All I saw in front of me was a sea of wavy sand dunes. It looked like one of the pictures I had seen of the Sahara in my previous life. The sun was about to set, the temperature dropped to below 0 degrees, something I'm used to, but that would be leaving Ilinalize behind. What do you think we should do, Ilinalize? I asked her. To my surprise, she was blushing as she looked at my sword, but when our eyes met she cleared her throat and composed herself. We won't get very far before the sun sets if we go out now. It's a little early, but we should take advantage of the opportunity to rest with a roof over our heads, she said while avoiding looking at me. And so we decided to spend the night in the ruin. Chapter 49 The Elf in Heat plus 18 The night turned out to be as frigid as I had feared. I had gotten used to the cold of the north, but the rapidity with which the temperature changed here made it harder to bear. For the moment we were fine, since we had thick stone walls to shelter us. But we would have to think about how to keep warm when we camped out in the open. Maybe I could make a temporary shelter with magic? The Earth Fortress is a good spell for that, but we would have to keep feeding it with mana or it would fall apart. If I played around with it a bit, maybe I could create a simple uglo-like structure that would hold me together, then we could make a fire inside to keep warm. Yes, that seems like a good plan, let's do it. However, for tonight we decided to wrap ourselves in our sleeping bags on the ground. Gino, Ilinalize muttered as she settled into her sleeping bag. What's wrong? I said as I turned to look at her. I've noticed that you also know magic, right? That's going to be crucial every time we go into combat. We have to prioritize your fighting ability, she said with a smile. The monsters of the Bigaric continent were not, on average, as fierce as those of the Demon continent, but some were supposedly of comparable strength. Letting your guard down could prove fatal. Well, let's go to sleep, shall we? I imagine we'll be moving around this desert for some time, so we should save our strength, Ilinalize muttered but got up and put her sleeping bag right next to mine as she lay down looking at me. Oh yeah, that woman. It's been 2 days without fucking shit. Yeah, you're right. I muttered. However, as much as I wanted to conserve my energy, I needed to expend some tonight. Sometimes it's not easy being a man, if anyone asks. It was because of the influence of a succubus. That same night, as I was lying on my side in the ruins, a sweet sensation ran through my crotch. I instantly felt my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw Ilinalize grimacing as she looked at me, with Gino Jr. in her grasp. She has kidnapped Mr. Sausage. Ilinalize, what are you doing? I muttered as she began to put her hands under my pants. I'm sorry, darling, but you see, it's a long story, but in short, I'm cursed and I need semen in order to keep living, she muttered as her hand reached up to Gino Jr. and squeezed him gently. That sounds like a cheap excuse to sleep with anyone, I muttered as I felt her massage on my partner below. Hee, believe it or not, it doesn't matter. I didn't want to get to this point because of your age, but I've already restrained myself a lot. Besides, you can do whatever you want with me, as long as you don't fall in love with me, she muttered with a smile while with one hand she continued caressing Gino Jr. and with the other she unbuttoned his shirt. Well, let's say it was because of a succubus, I muttered as I moved one hand and touched her medium breasts. Oh. Very good, she said with a smile and approached me. I found myself studying her pale neck and slender hands, her face looking like a more adult version of Sylphiette. She was also tall and had great grip strength and willpower, especially below the waist. And wasn't she supposedly very, very good in bed too? Hata. Ilinalize gasped in desire with flushed cheeks. Suddenly, my trunk had grown into a towering oak tree, and my thoughts became clouded with desire. Ilinalize let out a pleasurable sound as she smiled. She squirmed, her blanket slipping off, and I got a good look at her thighs and tight leather pants. The woman had a nice ass. I felt like squeezing it, and so I did. My fingers reached her thighs. They were really very thin, as was her entire body. It was impossible to believe that this was the same woman who repelled the attacks of a huge hydra with only a shield. She made a small sound and slightly separated her legs, inviting me. Shit. Unable to contain myself any longer, I got up from my sleeping bag and got on top of her. "Oh, are you going to take the lead?" she murmured as she spread her legs wider. "I can't. You were the one who seduced me, now take responsibility," I said as I pulled down her leather pants. Elinalyze didn't say anything else. She kept looking at me with a smile while she raised her hips a little to make it easier for me to take off her leather pants. Surprisingly, she wasn't wearing anything underneath. Her vagina was already wet and throbbing slightly. Without wasting any more time, I took off my own pants and Gino Jr. "Oh? What's that friend of yours over there, huh? He's excited," Elinalyze said in a seductive voice. I didn't answer her anything and slowly put my penis in her vagina, and surprisingly, despite how slutty you see her, her vagina is quite tight. "Af, move fast, fill me," she moaned as she trapped my hips with her legs. Unable to contain myself any longer, I began to move. Our crotches collided. I felt the tip of my penis as it led to her uterus. Elinalyze moaned with every little movement to the point of rolling her eyes and sticking out her tongue. This only made me hornier and I continued penetrating her. The fluids from her vagina splashed on my crotch, which made it easier to penetrate her. "More," she moaned and then arched her back and came. His sleeping bag was wet with her ejaculation and she was breathing hard, but I was just starting. "Give me more, fill my womb," she moaned as she rocked her hips with my cock still inside her. I pulled out my penis momentarily and made her lie face down and stuck my penis inside her again. "Oh, what are you waiting for? Give me your semen," she screamed while kicking the blankets. It seemed like she was having a tantrum. I follow her orders and continue penetrating her. In this position, he went deeper inside her, and this is noticeable by Elinalyze's muffled moans. I spent about 10 minutes penetrating her in this position until she came again. It seemed like she was getting tired, but I still had energy. Plus, I was able to delight in the sight of her fat ass bouncing on my crotch as I thrust my penis deep into her. After half an hour, Elinalyze came about 4 times, and I was just about to go for the first one. By this point, she was already desperate for cum, so she had me lay face down and she sat on my cock. "You are not allowed to come anywhere other than my vagina," she said as she leaned in to kiss me. The next moment, I felt like the life was sucked out of me. Elinalyze was moving her hips on my penis in a majestic manner. Apparently, it was the position in which he had the most experience. She was squatting on my cock. I had my hands on her tits and she was with her eyes closed and moaning, "Come, fill me all over," she demanded. She continued to ride me for another 10 minutes until I grabbed her hips and buried my cock as deep as I could go inside her. "That's inside me." "Ah, yes," she said sensually as I ejaculated inside her. Since I hadn't had sex for almost a month, I put a good load in her uterus. Elinalyze was moving on top of me with a face of satisfaction and lust. She was making me hard again. "That was a nice load, darling, but you must give me more of that delicious cum of yours if you want me to be satisfied," she whispered in my ear and then kissed it, making me hard again. "Ah, there it is," she moaned sensually and started fucking me again. She was doing squats with my cock and it felt damn great. It got to the point where we were both kissing while she was jumping with my cock inside her. After a few minutes, I ejaculated again, a bigger load than the previous one. So yummy," she murmured as she stuck her fingers into her vagina, scooping out drops of my semen and tasting it. By this point, I guess she was already satisfied because she was now breathing heavily while lying on my chest. After a few minutes, she pulled my penis out of her vagina and lay down next to me. "Hee hee, I won't lie to you, I think you're the best man I've had in a long time," she said while caressing my chest. I was also caressing his ass. It was big and firm. Just by touching it, he was already hard again. "Oh, it seems like your little friend here is still excited, huh?" Elinalyze said as she moved her arms and put her face in my crotch. "Are you going to do it?" She kissed the tip of my penis and started licking it. I could only writhe at the situation while trying not to come so easily. "Hee hee, so you want me to use my mouth, huh? Well, if you insist," she murmured, and the next moment she swallowed my penis all the way to the base. a real deep throat, and she was an expert. The sounds of Elinalize sucking my cock as her head bobbed up and down, her lips around my cock and her tongue licking the tip. In less than a minute I ejaculated again in her mouth. Elinalize just let out a sound of pleasure as I ejaculated in her mouth. Like the others, this was a good load, and after a few seconds she started swallowing it without asking me. A minute later she opened her mouth and all my semen had been swallowed. This just made me hard again. You're a bottomless pit, she said as she opened her legs waiting for me. In the end it took us another 2 hours of sex and I ejaculated another 4 times. This was enough to calm Elinalize's curse for a couple of days according to her. And so after about 3 hours I was satisfied and we fell asleep tightly in each other's arms. Chapter 50 The Desert Ecosystem. Our journey through the desert began the next morning. Elinalize had a huge smile on her face as she caressed her belly in satisfaction. But when morning came along with the first ray of sunlight, the lustful Elinalize disappeared, giving way to her adventurous side. We were now on the Greyrat continent. This place was not as safe as the central continent. I had to put my head in the game or I was going to get us both killed. Let's try to stay covered for now, I said as I put on my hood, and we set off. Make sure to stay hydrated too. Let me know if you get thirsty, I said. Of course, she replied seriously. Now that I see it, she seemed like a totally different person than last night. Maybe this is also part of her charm. We both wore coats and hoods on our heads, exposing any part of the body that could be dangerous here. Even though we were in the middle of a desert, I could refill our water supply with magic whenever necessary. Still, neither I nor Elinalize had any experience in this type of terrain, and there was no telling what we would find on the path ahead. Our course is north then, she murmured. Yes, please guide me, I said. Elinalize didn't need a compass to orient herself, a relatively well-known skill of the elves. They never lost their sense of direction, not even in forests as thick as Lumen. With that ability, along with the skills she had acquired over the years, I was confident she would keep us on track regardless of the obstacles we encountered. It's very hot out here, she sighed. I could only shrug at this. My mana capacity wasn't high enough to make artificial weather like Rudeus, so the most I could give her was unlimited water. It was the first time I had walked through a desert. I felt my feet sinking into the ground with every step. Luckily, I had become accustomed to moving through the snow. It was not exactly the same, but my ability to step lightly was still useful. However, this optimism only lasted until midday. I was getting more and more exhausted, and the sun that beat down on us was the main problem. Besides the scorching wind that kept blowing in my face, I noticed that my body temperature was high and I was starting to feel a little dizzy. I cursed myself. My resistance to sub-zero temperatures is of no use here. I rehydrated as often as I could, but this feeling of fatigue continued to increase rapidly. Elinalize was not better. Her steps were also more noticeable and she asked me for water more often. That first day we encountered multiple monsters. The first creature we encountered was a giant scorpion about 2 meters long. Its tail was split in two, and it could lash both sides independently of the other. Elinalize told me that it was called the twin scorpion of death. Its sting produced a very dangerous poison, although fortunately it could be cured with intermediate-level detoxification magic. The creature had a relatively strong shell, but with a long sword of silence, I was able to cut off both tails with relative ease. The thing was a B-rank monster. It didn't represent a danger to me, but if Elinalize had been alone as she planned, I would have had a harder time. Wow, that thing was big, huh? She said as she caught her breath. Yeah, but it was a piece of cake, I said as I wiped the blood off my sword. I guess you weren't bragging when you said you were a sword emperor, huh? She said while patting me on the back. The Greyrat's monsters weren't supposed to be comparable to those in the demon continent, so it was a little strange that the first one we encountered was so big. Maybe the scorpions are unusually big, she muttered. Sure, that could be. Sometimes you encounter the most dangerous monsters right off the bat, don't you? I said with a smile. Not very often, I'd say, she said with a snort. Maybe the monsters in this area are just on the stronger side then? I deduced. That seems a little more likely, she replied with a smile, and so we continued at our usual pace. The next monster we encountered was a tree ant, a common enemy this time. This one was a green tree ant cactus, rather than a walking tree, and it was also a C-rank monster. Capable of shooting needles at its enemies and using basic earth magic, but, once upon a time, it didn't pose much of a challenge. It's almost reassuring to encounter a tray ant, isn't it? Elinalise said as she cleaned her sword. I guess so, they really are everywhere, aren't they, almost like slimes, I said. Slimes? But those only live deep in caves, she said with a raised eyebrow. Sorry, don't mind me, anyway, it's a shame that they're cacti here, not trees, we can't use their bodies for firewood, I muttered. Yeah, they're too saturated with water, I imagine that could be useful on its own, but you already have your magic, she said. By now, Elinalise could already use intermediate-range water spells. Her classes at the university had not been a waste. The next threat came suddenly and without warning. They're attacking us, she shouted, jumping to my side. A fraction of a second later, a gigantic earthworm emerged from the ground right in front of where she was standing. It was an especially large earthworm, 1 meter thick and 5 meters long. It let out a strange bark in the air and then sank. My God, that scared me, she muttered as she leaned against me. That was a sandworm, wasn't it? I asked. Yes, and a very large one, she replied with a frown. It seemed that the sandworms here were also unusually large. I had caught a glimpse of 5 meters of its body, but the rest were still underground. They could be up to 10 meters long in total, which made them large enough to swallow a man whole. If one stepped over one without realizing it, it was the equivalent of stepping on an instant death trap. I turned over the ground where the sandworm was rooted, cutting it with blades of hardened earth. It died without so much as a squeal, a small puddle of liquid forming around the part of its body that had burst on the surface. The last monsters we encountered that day were a group of ants. We saw them after crossing a particularly large sand dune. The next moment Elinalise threw me to the ground, and we ended up sliding halfway up the hill we had just climbed. That's an army of phalanx ants. She whispered in my ear that didn't mean much to me, but I followed Elinalise's example by slowly crawling up the dune. This involved staring at her ass for a good while, always a sight for sore eyes. We snuggled together and I took the opportunity to hug her around the hip. She didn't say anything, so I continued. We looked over the crest at the phalanx ants, bright red creatures marching in an orderly formation. Each ant was between 30 centimeters and 1 meter long. Some were larger and some were smaller. They also had different shapes. I saw some with wings and even some with a strangely human-looking lower body. Despite the variations in their ranks, the creatures marched with the same determination, towards the same destination. It was basically a river of large military ants, the line stretching as far as the eye could see on both sides. Considering their size and numbers, this is definitely an S-rank threat, she muttered as she used my arm as a pillow. Some time had passed and we both laid on our backs as we waited. Well, really? Would you mind explaining? I'm a little curious, I said, genuinely curious. Phalanx ants are one of the most dangerous monsters in existence. They are known for their insatiable appetite and ability to consume anything in their path. Those ones are particularly massive as well. They must be a species unique to this continent, she explained. None of the individual ants are that powerful. Those down there are probably E rank or maybe D or C for the larger ones, she continued. Well, C rank is nothing to scoff at, I muttered. And from the looks of it, there were thousands upon thousands of them. However, the danger a monster represented was not assessed in a vacuum. One also had to take into account their tendency to move in groups. Oh, that must be the queen. Elinalise pointed at a particularly large ant in the crowd. It was at least 2 meters long and had the upper body of a human female. Nah, don't even think about trying to fight them. Elinalise said seriously. Sorry, I was just thinking about how to escape if they noticed us. Okay then, but let's be clear that we will wait here until the entire army passes, understand? She said. Okay, understood, I said, nodding. In the desert, the sun turned red as it set. The sand began to glow crimson and pools of shadow formed beneath the dunes, transforming the scene from a monotonous sandy brown into a striking pattern of vivid reds and blacks. It felt like we had entered a different world. But a desert is a desert. In my old world, the Sahara probably looked like this at dusk too. The temperature is dropping rapidly, we could advance further at night, right? I asked. I guess you're right, let's keep moving forward for now then, she replied. Sure. As we talked, I heard something fluttering through the air nearby. Looking up, I saw a group of bats about 50 centimeters long. Those are giant bats, Gino, Illinois said. Are they monsters? I asked, a borderline case, but they move in groups, we should, What's going on with these things? Illinois screamed in panic for some reason, however. These things were gathering around Illinois. They didn't seem to be attacking her, but they had her almost surrounded. Gino! Don't just stare, help me, she screamed. Yeah, sure, I said as I lunged at the bats. As agile as Illinois was, she couldn't keep moving with a wall of bats surrounding her. After putting some distance between us and the place of our battle with the bats, we found a quiet place to make a temporary shelter. This would be where we would spend the rest of the night. Instead of relying on our provisions, we decided to cook and eat the dead bat that same night. We still had plenty of food left, but any self-respecting adventurer tries to supplement their provisions when they can. After dinner, Illinois and I decided to rest for now. Tomorrow we would continue our trip. Chapter 51, Crossing the Sands. Our second day of travel was no less eventful. In fact, we encountered even more monsters. Despite how arid this desert seemed, it was crawling with bugs. Sandworms were particularly nasty, but they posed no real threat if you stayed alert and saw them in advance. Sometimes, however, other things demanded your attention, like monsters. At one point, we encountered a sandworm in the middle of a fight with a twin scorpion. The thing instantly swallowed me and began to crawl underground. Scared as it was, I managed to instantly fire off the intermediate windbreak spell to destroy it from within. And then I used earth magic to tunnel back to the surface. I discovered that Illinois had taken a hit from the scorpion's poisonous stingers. She was on her knees and her face was purple. She had been so alarmed to see the sandworm swallow me that she had lost her concentration. I quickly killed the scorpion with a long sword of light and used detoxification magic to save her life. In this simple attack I spent approximately 30% of my mana reserves. Neither of us had screwed up this time. Really, we had just been unlucky. Good job getting us out of that mess, Gino, she said with a smile. Certainly, Illinois didn't blame me for the situation, even though she had been close to death. The woman was definitely mature. Don't feel so miserable, okay? She said. No matter how awake you are, sometimes things get the better of you. We managed to pull through, and that's what matters, she continued with a smile. The risk of failure was ever present, as was the risk of dying. Illinois was aware of this from the start. Fortunately, that was our only brush with real danger that day. At one point we saw a colossal monster in the distance. It was moving slowly, but with every step it took it raised a huge cloud of sand visible even from a great distance. The thing must have been hundreds of meters in size. It was hard to describe. You could say it was like a blue whale with the legs of an elephant. That's a behemoth, isn't it, Lise? I asked her. Indeed, you could defeat one if you tried, she said apparently. The behemoth was one of the most famous monsters on this continent. Its length ranged from 100 to 1,000 meters. It was not clear what they ate, but they were only seen in the desert. They had a peaceful nature, for monsters, and usually left people alone unless they attacked them. I don't plan on going around raiding harmless herbivores without a good reason, I said with a shrug. However, if I ever find myself in money trouble, it might be worth trying to cast some magic on one from a safe distance. On our third day in the desert, we encountered our first sandstorm. Maybe encountered isn't the right word. We were walking around when we saw what looked like a wall in the distance, and when we got closer, it turned out to be a sand wall. Illinois and I considered waiting for it to die down, but from the looks of it, it was just a static storm that was constantly blowing in that spot. It didn't look like it was going to pass quickly or go away. And we were in a hurry, of course. I ended up using my magic to clear the storm until we were through the area. I knew it was best not to meddle too much with the weather, but this seemed like a case where it was justified. When I turned around to look back after an hour of walking, I discovered that the sandstorm had reappeared exactly in the same place as before. It seemed plausible that it was some sort of magical barrier itself. a natural-looking defense that blocked the path to the teleportation circle. On our 4th day, the number of monsters we encountered decreased considerably. Maybe the sandstorm kept them away from the area we just left. Obviously, there were creatures in this part of the desert too. But they were totally different from the region surrounding the ruin. The scorpions only had one tail, there was no army of ants, and the sandworms were barely as thick as a linolized waist. The 5th day was the same, walking along the same sand as always, contemplating the same unchanged landscape. I was hoping Elinolize would keep us on track, but I could feel that I had seen some of these sand dunes before, and doubt took over my mind. Could we really be lost? All I could do was be understanding. If she messed up, I had to tell her, "It's okay," with a big smile. This was not a zone of negativity. Gino, I think I see something in the distance," she murmured. In the end, my resolve was not tested. Indeed, I could make out a vague blur shining on the horizon in the direction Elinolize was pointing. The color of the stain suggested that it was not something that belonged in the desert. However, there was still a chance that it was a mirage. We headed towards the spot, staying alert. Thinking about it, we hadn't encountered any monsters today. While I was thinking about that, the shape of the stain became larger and clearer. It was a gigantic rock formation and was about 50 meters high. "Should we find some way around?" Elinolize asked. "No need, let's go up to the top. I'll use magic," I said. With a simple spell, I created a pillar of earth while I took Elinolize and brought her closer to me. My mana was not powerful enough to make something as stable as Rudeus, so this was just a safety measure. We started to climb like an improvised elevator and quite calmly. But suddenly I felt a strange sensation in my ass. Something was caressing it. "Lise, is there a reason why he's groping me now?" I muttered. "It's been days, we'll do it again tonight," she said with a smile, and I could only shrug my shoulders. She kept groping my ass all the way up, which was about 3 minutes. Upon reaching the top, I jumped down from the pillar with Elinolize. "Lise, we're at the top now," I muttered. "Yeah, I guess so," she said, blushing. She kept clinging to me and looked at my crotch with passion. "You can let me go now, that's for tonight?" I murmured. "Come on, let's continue then," I murmured to her. "Of course," she murmured, blushing. However, just a few seconds after we started walking, a shadow fluttered over us. "Gino, get down!" Elinolize screamed. As Elinolize screamed a warning, I lunged downward and forward without even looking up. An instant later, something fast passed over me. I jumped to my feet and looked up. We had been attacked by a monster with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle, beating its huge wings violently, and fell to the ground some distance from us. "It's a griffin!" Elinolize shouted. I unsheathed my sword and prepared to attack. But just then another griffin fell behind us. We were now surrounded. "There are 2 of them. Take care of the other one, Gino," Elinolize shouted as she pulled out her own sword. At this moment, the griffin was leaning forward, beak ajar, staring fiercely at me. Without hesitation, I threw a long sword of light at it. The bird didn't even have time to react when its head fell to the ground with a thud. I looked at Elinolize and she was having trouble in her battle. "Physum!" A swift movement that cut through the air passed by Elinolize and killed the second griffin by decapitating it. We both took a few moments to look around the area for more reinforcements before finally letting out a sigh of relief. Midline horizontal ellipsis. "I'm sorry, Gino. I completely got careless," Elinolize muttered as she looked at the corpses of the griffins. "No, I'm the one who wasn't looking above myself," I said, giving her a pat on the back. She smiled at me and nodded. After apologizing to each other for our carelessness, we turned our attention to the path ahead. The top of the rock platform had a layer of sand here and there, but for the most part, it was solid stone. At least we wouldn't have to worry about anything lurking beneath the surface. "Let's make sure to keep an eye on the sky from now on," I muttered. "Yeah, let's do that," she said with a smile. With that brief battle analysis, we continued our journey, and in the evening I made sure to satisfy Elinolize. On the 6th day, we discovered that the rocky platform was a nesting ground for griffins. Various creatures seemed to have divided the area into their own territories, judging by the steady pace of attacks we were facing. Night fell, and from the looks of it, the griffins were quite territorial. Once you beat the locals, there wasn't much risk of another group breaking in to attack you later that day. In other words, we were safe here for the time being. For the first time in a long time. We made a fire and roasted some griffin meat for dinner. The last group we had defeated was a male, a female, and their child, so we went with the youngest of the three. The younger animals tended to have the most tender and tasty meat. The meat was tender and juicy, and it had a slightly odd taste. Given the way I had cooked it, it wasn't fully cooked, but that wasn't a problem, and once again the surface was chewy. I quite like the way you cook this, Gino. You're definitely friends with that asshole Jesse. You cook just like him? Elinalise said with a nostalgic smile. I'm quite glad to hear that, I said with a smile. Apparently, Elinalise was openly licking the grease off her fingers. Normally she wouldn't be doing that when she was eating at a random tavern. No, not unless she was trying to seduce someone. We both looked into each other's eyes. That night we did it outdoors. The 7th day started out like the 6th, and we steadily advanced northward as we fought off the griffins. This rocky platform rose higher than I expected, perhaps more like a mountain, but though the top was mostly flat, we couldn't see very far in any direction thanks to the giant rocks scattered haphazardly across its surface. Every now and then, though, we'd come across a more open area. That was where the local griffins would attack us. We'd defeat them and move on, rinse and repeat. Oh! But then, suddenly, the rock platform came to an end. Well, about time. Elinalise muttered with a sigh of relief. The ground beneath us was no longer a barren desert. There were a handful of trees and plants down there. It looked like some sort of savanna without much grass. In the distance was a large lake, with white roofs clustered around it. We had found the town of Bazaar. Chapter 52 Bazaar City. On our 8th day on the Greyrat continent, we climbed down the rock platform and headed to Bazaar. From our point of view, the city looked like a donut. The large round lake in the center was surrounded by a ring of white frost, shops and buildings, with a small green area on the outskirts. Now that I think about it, it's been a while since I've eaten anything sweet. We're finally here. It's been quite a walk, Elinalise sighed in relief. Yeah, no kidding, it seems like we've covered a lot of ground in the last week, I muttered. I guess the monsters made it feel even longer than it was, she replied. The ground in this area wasn't just sand, there was real soil, albeit a reddish-brown one that suggested it wasn't particularly fertile, and the plains were dotted with large rocks and some weird plants. It actually reminded me a bit of the demon continent from my memories of the anime. At least it was easy to walk around here, and the temperature was much less extreme. There was a big difference in climate compared to the desert on the other side of this rocky platform. On our 8th day on the Greyrat continent, we climbed down the rock platform and headed to Bazaar. From our point of view, the city looked like a donut. The large round lake in the center was surrounded by a ring of white frost, shops and buildings, with a small green area on the outskirts. Now that I think about it, it's been a while since I've eaten anything sweet. We're finally here. It's been quite a walk, Elinalise sighed in relief. Yeah, no kidding, it seems like we've covered a lot of ground in the last week, I muttered. I guess the monsters made it feel even longer than it was, she replied. The ground in this area wasn't just sand, there was real soil, albeit a reddish-brown one that suggested it wasn't particularly fertile, and the plains were dotted with large rocks and some weird plants. It actually reminded me a bit of the demon continent from my memories of the anime. At least it was easy to walk around here, and the temperature was much less extreme. There was a huge difference in climate compared to the desert on the other side of this rocky platform. When we reached the outskirts of Bazaar, it was already nighttime, and bats were beginning to flutter around the sky. However, they didn't swoop down to attack us, they were just regular bats. Still, there could be monsters lurking around. Even though we are now close to the city, we stayed alert as we approached the city. Just as we got closer, a piercing scream could be heard coming from somewhere nearby. Recognizing the screech of a griffin, we both instantly went on guard. Are they coming for us? Elinalise asked. No, I don't think so, they're fighting over there, see? I said, looking at the pack. Elinalise looked but couldn't make out what she was looking at. What's going on over there? She muttered. I couldn't say, I replied. We advanced cautiously towards the city. Soon I saw a small group of people fighting against a pack of griffins. There were 4 humans and 5 monsters. Well, there were 6 humans, but 2 of them were lying motionless on the ground. Of the 4 survivors, 1 was crouching and holding his head instead of fighting. In other words, it was 3 against 5. The humans outnumbered. They defended themselves from the griffins with large swords. They were a well-coordinated group, but it was obvious that they were starting to tire. Should we help them, Lise? I asked her. She shrugged her shoulders without commitment. I'll leave it in your hands, she said. Very well, I answered and started running towards the group. In a second I dispatched 4 of the monsters with a long sword of light. The last one tried to flee, but I finished it off with a stone bullet in the back. Once the battle was over, Isekai caught up with me and we both approached the group of warriors. Is it over? The man who had been crouching and shaking finally raised his face, then looked around nervously, smiling in obvious relief. The warriors who had been fighting the griffins approached him. Standing up, the man began to shout at them. What are you doing standing there? Get out and start searching. The warrior he had addressed nodded and immediately ran off. My God, what a mess! What the hell was a pack of griffins doing here anyway? He muttered. Shaking his head, he turned and approached us with the 2 warriors at his side. Your help was very kind, traveler. Allow me to express my gratitude, the man said, bowing. The man wore a turban and a red tunic under a yellow robe, sporting a long, thin mustache. Well, it seemed like you were in trouble. We couldn't just abandon you, I said. Most people certainly would have. The man had an almost incomprehensible accent. Isekai couldn't help but frown trying to understand it, but it sounded like Bashrant's accent. May the blessings of the wind bless you and yours, he said. With those last words, the man turned around and walked back to his fallen comrades. At least he gave thanks. The other 2 members of his group were fighters wearing red armor and a thick skirt-like garment around their waist. They were more equipped than the average warrior of the central continent. The weapons they carried on their hips were large curved swords with thick blades over a meter in length. You don't see foreigners very often around here. The first to speak was a huge man with an eye patch over his left eye and a tattoo on his face. He was the same height as me, 6 feet, and probably had an eye patch over his left eye, obviously a seasoned veteran. Hey kid, is that girl a succubus? The other warrior was a light brown-skinned girl who stared at Isekai. She couldn't see much under her armor, but she looked muscular. I guess she's in her 20s. Well, I guess I am, so to speak, Isekai muttered. Well, she admits it, the girl said with a snort. The man turned to his companion and hit her on the head. Don't be an idiot. What kind of succubus travels with a man? You have the nerve to insult them after they saved our lives, the man said. Oh. But boss, you said a girl appears when there are bats around. It has to be a succubus. The girl moaned in pain pitifully. This is exactly why they call you an airhead girl, he scolded. Sighing, he turned to Isekai to apologize. I'm sorry, miss, we didn't mean to offend you. Carmelita is a bit of an idiot, that's all, the man said with a bow. It doesn't matter, I'm not offended at all, Isekai said as she smiled at the man, causing him to blush deeply. The man was now staring openly at Isekai. Isekai didn't seem to mind being stared at. If anything, she seemed proud of being stared at. I guess she's used to it by now. Taking his gaze away from Isekai, the man looked back at me. My name is Balabatum. Thanks again for your help, stranger, he said. My name is Gino Britzes and this is Isekai. I said, understood. Well, if you ever need anything. What's the delay? You too. We need to find that shipment now. The mustachioed man from before interrupted Balabatum. Sorry, I have to go. I'm sure our boss will reward you later too, Balabatum said, and he and Carmelita ran towards their boss. The 3 of them had a brief chat, then they split into 2 groups and ran off in different directions. What? They're just leaving? I was expecting a little more gratitude. Isekai said as she leaned on me. I could understand how she felt, but we hadn't gone into this expecting a reward. This Balabatum guy had promised he'd reward us later, but we didn't even know the name of the guy with the mustache, and how were they going to come looking for us if they didn't know who we were? Were they expecting us to track them down and demand payment or something? Well, whatever, it wasn't like I had stepped in with the hopes of a big payoff or something, just having those guys remember my name would be enough. By the time we reached the town proper, the sun had set. However, the place was surprisingly well lit. There were large bonfires everywhere, like those you see at a fair. The ground around these bonfires was covered with some kind of carpet. People sat around them in groups, eating and having fun joyfully. It reminded me of a big picnic to watch the cherry blossoms. "I'm a little hungry," Elise muttered. Seeing everyone around us partying made our stomachs rumble rapidly. While looking for an inn, a man approached us and called out, "Hey, you two want to eat? I can make room for you for just 3 sincha right now," the man said. We agreed and the man had us sit down on a mat, then held out his hand expectantly. "I'm going to ask you to pay in advance, folks. We've already cooked the food, see?" the man said, pointing at the huge steaming pot. I took out 3 bronze coins and handed them over. The man examined them suspiciously. "What the hell is this?" he said. "Bronze coins from the Azura Kingdom," I said. "The kingdom of what?" "I can't use these things, dude," he said, handing the coins back to me. "How about this then?" Elise said, pulling out a gold ring from her bra. The man took the ring, examined it closely and then nodded happily and left to find another customer. "It's better to barter in situations like this," she said again. Her instincts as an adventurer kicked in. She had figured out the right move instantly. "I'm glad to have you around, Elise," I said. "No need for flattery, dear," she said and gave me a kiss on the cheek, and so we enjoyed our food. After that, we left that place in search of inns. Most of the merchants around us were already closing their shops and heading to their homes. The bonfires were going out one by one, and people seemed to be getting ready to go to sleep. Seeing the man who had sold us the food before, I called out to him. "Excuse me, is there an inn around here?" I asked him. "Inns? What are you talking about?" "Sleep wherever you want," he said. After this, Elise chose a place near the lake, and with magic I created a kind of earth igloo and we got in there. "Oof, well, at least we've gotten this far, right?" she murmured as she dropped her bags on the ground. "So far, so good, but we're only halfway there. Tomorrow we'll look for a guide to wrap 'em," I said. Elise nodded and began to undress. And I've noticed that Elise wants to do it more and more often, and she also behaves affectionately with me. Well, what does it matter? We'll be together for a while, so I should take advantage of it. The only complaint is that Elise moans very loudly, but that's for another day. Chapter 53. On the way to wrap 'em by the morning hours, Bazar had completely transformed. The quiet of the night gave way to an explosion of lively commerce. The merchants spread their wares outside their shops, shouting to everyone who passed by. "I've got big, juicy melons here. Last chance, folks. They're gone tomorrow. There are griffin claws here, 30 sincha if you buy now. Does anyone have nania cloth? I have tokutsu fruit to trade." The vendors shouted out their prices, while their potential customers shouted back their offers. "Gino, we didn't come here to buy gifts," Elise chided me. "Yeah, I know," I said with a shrug. As the market bustled around us, Elise and I got to work on our to-do lists from the night before. First, we needed money. The currency of this place is sincha, something unfamiliar to me. However, the coin itself wasn't particularly different from any other. It was just a small round piece of gold with a bad design stamped on the surface. We sold some of the stuff we had brought and got a good amount of this local currency. It seemed like bartering was very common here, but it was always smart to have some money in your pocket. For now, we secured about 7,000 sincha to pay for our short-term needs. I wasn't sure how much we were going to need, but our dinner yesterday had only been 2 sincha. We would probably be fine for a while. With the money problem sorted, we started gathering information about Rapan. Apparently, it was a major city, so it wasn't that hard. And it seems that the city is about a month's journey north. I also asked for directions to get there, just to get an idea of what to expect. The usual route is through the Nkats region and take the long way around the desert, but there have been a lot of bandits on that road lately, so it's not safe. The smarter merchants are cutting right through the Yuko Desert these days, and so they head to the marker then head north to the oasis. From there, it's a winding road west for a while. Once the Kara Mountains are visible, you keep heading north towards the next oasis, From there, the desert is a little less brutal to the west and you make your way through it as fast as you can, and then you head northwest to get back on the normal path and thus you reach the labyrinth city of Rapan. What a tedious shit. Elinalise had assumed that we would find a guide fairly easily, but her experience was not really applicable here. When you visit an unknown country for the first time, you always start with the border towns where travelers were common. That difference had confused us. Things were not going as planned anymore, but still, there was no point in panicking. Life always throws a few snowballs at you, hee. Besides, we have only been here for 2 weeks. The normal trip would normally have lasted a year. What would I normally do in a situation like this, Elinalise? I asked her as we sat down to lunch. Pushing straight for the shortest route possible. To be honest though, I've had enough of walking through the desert for a while now, she muttered as she brought her spoonful of soup to her mouth. Yes, that makes sense, I muttered. What do you think then? She said with a lift. Perhaps we can accompany a merchant heading to Rapan, she suggested. That sounds like a plan. Let's see if we can find one, I said, and so we finished our lunch. Sir, do you happen to know of any merchants on their way to Rapan? I asked. There wouldn't be any caravans actively seeking escorts around here, for the same reason that there were no guides to be found, but Elinalise was an S-rank adventurer and I was a sword emperor. If we offered money and our services, we might be able to find someone willing to take us with them. But unfortunately, the man told us that there weren't many people heading to Rapan in general. Most of the traveling merchants were heading to a place called Kinkara in the east. Still, I tried asking around town for a while. Almost everyone was heading to Kinkara, and after an hour or two, I had almost resigned myself to that route. But then, just when I was about to give up, we stumbled upon a lead. Oh, Rapan? Then you want Galban? I think he's set up shop on the west side of the river. Go see if you can find him, he said. Elinalise and I immediately went to find this Galban. He had evidently made a fortune traveling the route between Rapan and a city called Torian, bringing magic stones to Rapan and collecting objectives on the way back. People said he traveled in a caravan of 6 camels, which meant he made good money. We didn't need to ask much to find the shop we were looking for. It wasn't very big, but there were 6 camel-like animals tied in front. When we got closer, a dark-skinned woman came out from inside the shop. She was wearing a breastplate and a skirt that wrapped around her waist. Her muscles couldn't be seen under the equipment, but she looked quite strong. It took me a few seconds to realize that it was Carmelita, the same warrior I had met yesterday. Hey, you're those people from yesterday. She screamed. Apparently, she also remembered us, although she seemed surprised to see us. Apparently, the little mustachioed man she had saved yesterday was Galban himself. Thank goodness she had decided to help him yesterday. Galban greeted us with a warm smile as we entered his tent. My apologies for yesterday, friends. We were surprised to see that you had already left when we returned yesterday, he said. Apparently, they had gone out to look for their camels, which had fled in the chaos, along with the valuable cargo they were carrying. Then they returned to the battle site and discovered that we were gone. Galban claimed to have spent a lot of time trying to find us that night. He could have explained the plan before disappearing then. It must be fate that he found us like this. Would you like to join my caravan as bodyguards? He said. Anyway, from the looks of it, he was looking to hire new swordsmen. That made sense. He had lost some yesterday. How about 500 cincia to Rapan? What do you say? He said. Judging by the way he was reciting compliments on my defeat of the Griffins, he'd had that idea in mind all along. I seem to remember him curling up in a ball for the entire battle, but whatever, this was exactly what we needed. Okay, sure, we'll go with you to Rapam then, I said with a smile. Splendid. That's really wonderful. I'd even be willing to sign you both to a long-term exclusive contract. If you're interested, I've never seen a swordsman of your caliber before. I'd make it worth it, I assure you. How about 10,000 cincia a year? No, wait, Balabatum would make a fuss. Would 8,000 be enough? I could. The offers were starting to get too ambitious, so I ended up having to interrupt. I'm sorry, but we have to take care of something in Rapan. However, we'll keep the offer in mind, I said. To my surprise, Galban accepted it quite easily. We had found our ticket to Rapan. Everything was back on track. And so, we set out for Rapan as members of Galban's caravan. The head of his guard team was the warrior Balabatum, also known as Hawkeye. His companions were Carmelita the Bonebreaker and Taunt the Great Edge. Adding myself and Alinalize, we had 5 fighters and a merchant in our group. There were also 6 camels if we counted them. I considered making up names for those guys as well, but decided against it after learning that we might have to eat them if we ran out of food in the desert. I didn't want my first taste of camel meat to taste like guilt. Before we set out, we gathered to define our basic battle formation. As a general rule, we would keep Galban in the center. Balabatum would go in front, accompanied by Carmelita on the left and Taunt on the right. Alinalize and I would position ourselves at the rear. The 5 of us would form a protective circle around our master and his camels. No matter which direction we were attacked from, one of us should be able to intercept the threat before it could harm our client. The classic Imperial cross formation, basically. We began traveling east of Bazaar until we reached the main regional highway. The place names meant nothing to me, but this sounded like the route that was frequented by bandits. To be safe, I told Balabatum what I had heard. "We don't know of a safer route through the desert," he said. "If bandits attack, that's what we're here for. Sometimes they just demand a toll and let us go on our way." Still, there was a chance we might encounter some greedier bandits with interest in more than just money and goods. For example, they might demand that we hand over Alinalize, given how attractive she was. That could be a problem. It's not like the 2 of us were old friends of Galban and company. We had saved their lives, but that didn't mean they would risk their necks for us if it came to that. There was always the chance that we might be hanged. "You seem nervous, Gino, but I wouldn't worry too much," Alinalize said quietly. "With your skills as a swordsman on our side, a few bandits shouldn't be a problem," she said. "You think so?" I muttered. "I do, and if worst comes to worst, I'll use my charm on them," she said with a wink. "What, do you want to be taken to their base, chained up, and beaten?" I said with a raised eyebrow. "God, you're extreme. As long as you go willingly, even the bandits will be gentle with me," she said with a smile. "Are you speaking from experience?" "We all make mistakes in our youth." Alinalize didn't seem too worried. Those days are long gone though, and she'd probably be less inclined to do something like that now. "Well, whatever, we could probably fend off an attack pretty easily." Our group made its way east through the barren fields for a while. We had to fight a lot of monsters along the way. There were Greyrat buffaloes, which would charge at you in groups, and large tarantulas, huge spiders that moved slinkily. We also encountered windmaster eagles, flying monsters that would cast wind spells at you from above. Some of our desert friends also appeared, mostly cactus tray ants and those killer lizards, which were apparently called gyroraptors. However, Balabatum proved to be able to detect our enemies well in advance, so we were never forced into serious combat. It turned out that he had a demon eye himself, thus earning him the name Hawkeye. His demon eye was the same type as Ghislaine's. It allowed him to see the flow of mana in the world around him. This was very useful as a means of detecting enemies. "We have monsters ahead. Ready for combat, everyone." So far, he had perfectly predicted every approaching monster and every change in the weather. It was almost like traveling with Rudeus. He wasn't as accurate in details, but he detected enemies very quickly. His many years of experience were probably a key factor. So with all this, our journey to Rapan continued. Chapter 54 Desert Warriors at Night. The 5 of us would take turns standing guard while Galban rested alone in his tent. We were all expected to sleep outside. Not that I expected equal treatment or anything. I created a shelter and encouraged everyone to sleep inside, but Balabatum and the others refused, saying that it would be harder for them to notice any monsters that might approach. That seemed like a legitimate reason to sleep outside, to be honest. I felt a little uncomfortable using the shelter myself, but Alinalize stepped in. "There's no need to feel bad, Gino. We have our own way of doing things, and will be more useful if we're well rested tomorrow," she said. That made sense to me, so we ended up sleeping in our little hut. After all, it was definitely more restful than the alternative. 2 of us would stand guard at a time for the entire night. I had assumed that one would be enough, but apparently, it was safer that way when you had a group this size. We would change shifts every night. On our first night, I was paired with Carmelita. "Hello, I guess we'll be working together tonight, huh?" I muttered. "Yeah, don't fall asleep," she grumbled. Well, I didn't plan on it, I said with a shrug. Although we technically had a job to do here, staring silently at nothing in particular can be quite boring. The two of us eventually started making small talk. Thanks for the help the other day, she said with a slight smile. Oh, you're welcome. It wasn't a big deal, I said. You're strong, so is the other one, the woman, she remarked. Carmelita the Bonebreaker was a warrior by profession and would be turning 21 this. Her weapon of choice was a broad, thick-bladed sword over a meter in length, which she swung ferociously in combat. It seemed that many of the warriors in this region were partial to such huge weapons. Balabatum also carried a huge sword. There seemed to be a lot of big monsters with thick, sturdy shells around here. It made sense to use weapons that wouldn't break easily. As much of a swordsman as you were, you wouldn't want to try and cut a hole in an iron plate with a small, thin rapier. Her combat style also seemed to be somewhat unique from what I'd seen. Your wife's sword is too thin, though you can't kill anything with it, she said seriously. Actually, you might be surprised, it's a magic item, and she knows how to use it. I've seen her cut griffins. Oh, and just so you know, she's not really my wife, we're just friends heading to Rapan together, I muttered. But you're sleeping with her, aren't you? When is a succubus coming? She said. Well, yes, but not in that sense, I said. So she is your woman, she grumbled with satisfaction. I don't know why that would make her my woman, I muttered. When a succubus comes, men get aroused, women sleep with them, it's the way of things in the desert, she said. Oh? Carmelita went on to explain the connection between succubi and the way bands of warriors worked in the desert, sounding rather proud of herself. Nowadays, succubi can be found all over the continent. The species was originally native to the southwestern region, and their numbers were relatively low, but in the war 400 years ago, Laplace had deliberately encouraged their reproduction. It had been part of his plan to break the stubborn resistance of Greyrat's warriors. Succubi were deadly against men. Their pheromones could incapacitate even veteran fighters with a strong will. If two of them approached me at once, or if one appeared right in front of me, I had no confidence at all in surviving. Over time, the warriors of the Greyrat continent had adapted to their circumstances. Each band began to travel with a number of women. At first, these were usually slaves or prisoners of the demons, but the warriors soon realized that non-combatants held them back. The women had little stamina and constantly needed to be protected in battle. The warriors pondered the matter. They racked their brains for years and finally came up with a solution. They could train the women to be combatants as well. Exactly the kind of solution you'd expect from a Conan the Barbarian party. And so the women warriors of the Greyrat continent came into being. Honestly, the culture shock was real. I had read about tribes with similar arrangements in my old world, but it was definitely hard to understand. I couldn't even convince myself that it was sexy. I looked at Carmelita for a long moment, trying to understand things from her point of view. When she noticed my gaze, she blushed. I appreciate it. If a succubus appears, I can help you, she murmured, and I just nodded. As our group moved east, the land around us became increasingly green. King Kara's place was in this direction, and a large jungle just beyond. I found it a little strange that a jungle could exist so close to a barren desert, but we weren't going to get the chance to see it this time. When we reached a large vertical rock that someone had left as a reference point, Galban changed our course and we began to head north. After 3 days of traveling in that direction, we came upon the main regional highway. It was not paved, let alone actively maintained. It seemed more like the natural product of countless travelers moving in the same direction. However, compared to the sandy terrain we had traveled on, it felt firm and reliable under my feet. That suited me. Sir, we might encounter bandits now that we're on the road. I think we'll manage just fine, but if things get bad. Balabatum muttered, I'm paying you good money, aren't I? Just worry about keeping the cargo safe, Galban grumbled. Yeah. Agreed, Balabatum replied. Balabatum clearly wanted Galban to consider abandoning the cargo in case of emergency, but the man had none of that in mind. Maybe his cargo was more important to him than his life. It didn't make much sense to me, but who was I to judge? Are we going to be okay, boss? Carmelita asked. Don't waste your time worrying about that, you airhead, Balabatum replied with a smile. Britzes, Dragon Road, I want you to stick to Galban like glue from now on. Taunt, you're on the camels. Don't let a single one get away. Bonehead, you take the rear. I'll scout ahead of us and give the signal if there's anything. You better not get lost. Balabatum commanded, Understood, boss. Understood. Understood. Assuming our new positions, we set off cautiously. From the looks of it, the bandits around here tend to set up ambushes and wait for people to stumble upon them. If you spot them early and go around them, it's possible to avoid trouble altogether. Thanks to Balabatum's expert scout, we were able to spot the first ambush on our path well in advance. The groups of people weren't that easy to spot with his demon eye, but he had managed to spot them the old-fashioned way. We made a long detour off the road and skirted around the danger. Not many people want to walk past a dog poop they've seen ahead, right? The normal thing to do is to go around it. In the end, this was a mistake. Maybe Balabatum was spotted by the enemy during his scouting expedition, and they followed him to us. Maybe he had only seen a small part of the bandits' forces, and our detour led us to their main army. In any case, we were attacked. It happened just after we had put a safe distance between us and the ambush. Everyone was starting to breathe a little easier. And then something came whistling through the air. Suddenly, Taunt had an arrow in his chest and fell to the ground. I started to run towards him, intending to cast a healing spell. But Elinalize grabbed me by the neck and pulled me back. As I did, another arrow hit the camel Taunt was standing next to. Run! Balabatum shouted. They're attacking us. They're coming from the west. I wanted to go for the bandits, but Elinalize grabbed me by the neck and made me run alongside her. Eventually, I gave up and Elinalize let go. Galban and the camels were already desperately running forward. I followed them, running as fast as I could. There was a group of men on horseback on a hill to our left, and they were charging at us. They were on horseback and we were on foot. They all wore identical sandy yellow turbans. Sir, we have to leave the camels. They might let us go if we hand over everything. No way. Are you suicidal or just an idiot? Protect my load, damn it. That's what I hired you for. No way. There are too many of them. As Balabatum and Galban shouted at each other, our wounded camel stumbled awkwardly. Just as I realized he was foaming at the mouth, he staggered to the side and collapsed. Shit. Those are poisoned arrows. I warned. They're coming from the rear too. Carmelita screamed another group of horsemen was approaching us from behind, and the archers on the hill were preparing their next volley. Most of their shots fell short, but a few were able to make their arrows fly. Every now and then, one would come dangerously close to hitting us. There must have been 50 of them. No, 100. And that was only the ones we could see. The word bandits had fooled me quite a bit. This was an army we were up against. I tried to analyze the situation. They were attacking us from the flank and the rear, at least. There were no enemies in front of us, that's where we should run. But no, I needed to finish these bastards off once and for all. Balabatum, I'm going to cover us in the fog. Keep running in a straight line. I shouted, what? Okay, he replied. Summoning a huge amount of moisture in a wide range around us, I effectively covered the area in a thick blanket of fog. It almost seemed like we were inside or something. No matter how talented the archers were, they couldn't shoot at us now, and it was time to stain Dragon Phoenix. Unsheathing my sword, I rushed at the bandits. In a fraction of a second I could feel my sword cutting through human parts. I didn't need to see where. My sword killed them with one stab. In less than 30 seconds I had killed around 40 bandits. Some were smart and retreated, but I didn't give them a chance. Gino! Elinalize shouted at me, and that was my order to retreat. Shortly after, I returned to Elinalize, where the bodyguards were waiting for me. Galban was pale and breathing heavily due to exhaustion, but there was no further damage. Balabatum was surprisingly calm and collected, considering we had just lost another of his men. His first attention was to redo our formation. Far from stopping to mourn his comrade, he didn't even say Taunt's name again. He was the same professional and focused bodyguard as always. He seemed a little cold, but that was probably how things went in his line of work. His people were used to this. Death was a constant companion for them, It only took one mistake or a bit of bad luck to end their lives. This was a common attitude on the demon continent as well, in retrospect. It was a way of thinking I couldn't understand. 2 weeks later, we finally arrived at the labyrinth city of Rapan. We had reached our destination. Now it was time to get started. Chapter 55 Arrival. The labyrinth city of Rapan was one of a kind. Rapan was in the middle of a vast desert, trapped inside a peculiar and enormous white cage. Any curious person who came closer would discover that this cage was built with bones, those of a long-dead behemoth. The ribs alone were large enough to enclose the entire city. At one point, the city had been nothing more than a small oasis. The remains of the behemoth had transformed it, and now it was surrounded by a surprising number of labyrinths, making it an attractive destination for countless adventurers. That said, this place was unexpectedly green, perhaps thanks to the oasis next to the bone pillars. Even from afar, he could see a line of what looked like palm trees. The environment was also unique. There was something like a raw smell in the air, not unlike the crowded slave markets. Surprised? Those pillars are actually the ribs of a behemoth, Galban muttered. When the great hero, the North god Kalman II visited this land, he and his companions defeated a behemoth that was rampaging through the desert, feasted on some of its flesh, and let the rest of its body rot away, leaving what you see now, bones that refuse to decompose, a testament to the passage of time, he explained. Incredible, I muttered as I looked out at the city. The ants were among the numerous monsters that feasted on the fallen behemoth's flesh, and they are the cause of the city's numerous labyrinths. When the monsters devoured other monsters stronger than them, they gave birth to powerful creatures in turn. Those mutant ants dug countless nests, and all the nests became labyrinths. Galban continued to explain. I see, that makes a lot of sense, I muttered. We said goodbye to Galban after arriving at Rapan. Apparently, his group was going to set up shop on the outskirts of the city. Our time together had been short, but I had learned a lot from his group, and they had taken care of us. Thanks for everything, I said. Same here. If you ever need anything again, just say it. Balgon replied with a smile. It was a quick farewell. I said as little goodbye as possible and only bowed to Balabadum and Carmelita. Now we had to look for Jess or Paul. I certainly hoped they were here since we had made all this way in a hurry. There was still some time before the sunset, and normally we would move to find an inn first, but perhaps we should prioritize finding those two instead. How are we going to do this? I asked. Excellent question. This town is big enough to have an adventurers guild, so let's go there first, Elinalise said. Understood, I replied. When we asked the locals about the location of the guild, they pointed us to the center of the town, the usual place for such things. The people walking around the streets were mainly merchants. Most of them wore the same attire as Galban. The Adventurers Guild building was carved out of a huge rock, probably by magic, and once you entered, it was well ventilated enough to feel refreshed. The atmosphere inside the guild was more or less the same as the rest of the town, but being the type of town it was, there were no newbie adventurers to be seen. Okay, let's start asking around for Paul and Jess, Elinalise said. Sounds good to me. I'm sure we'll find out something if we ask, I said. Jess must have an information network here by now, so I'm sure he'll find out if we go snooping around using his name. Oh, it seems like it won't be necessary, she murmured. I followed her gaze to discover a monkey-faced man in a corner of the guild. Come on, I'm begging you, you owe me one too, Jess pleaded. You're asking for the impossible, a man replied. Can't you give in this time? This is a race against time, Jess said, clasping his hands in a sign of supplication. Don't tell me. It's been a month, right? She must be dead already, the man replied. You son of a bitch monkey. He must have had something to do with it. There's no way, even if he is. At least we have to go in and check, find his remains. Come on. I beg you. I've seen your skill myself. That's why I'm here. I'll even pay you double. Jess said desperately. He didn't know that damn rat could make a face like that. I'm sorry, but try someone else. I don't feel like dying. The man said. Jess tried for a while to persuade the man, but in the end, the man shook his head and Jess clicked his tongue. You damn coward. I can't believe you bother calling yourself an adventurer with that attitude. Jess shouted. Yeah, say what you want, the man said as he walked out the door without even looking back. It seems like he's really backed into a corner, I muttered as I crossed my arms. Oh, that's how it usually is, Elinalise said. Really? I had a different impression of him, I said to keep up appearances. He must have been trying to look more mature in front of you? Hey Jess! Elinalise shouted. The monkey turned his head looking, his eyes widened when he saw us and he shuffled his feet towards us. Oh, it's Elinalise, he said excitedly. Sorry to keep you waiting, she said with a smile. The monkey let out an empty laugh. Not at all, you've actually gotten here a lot faster than I thought, he said as his gaze turned to me. Actually, how the hell did you get here so fast? HM? It's only been 6 months since I sent the letter, he exclaimed. We'll talk about that later. What happened to Zenith? She asked. His face clouded over. Not very well. I sent you that letter because I figured it would be a long affair, although to be honest, well, we can talk about that later too, he muttered and finally got up the courage to talk to me. With his best performance, Jess' eyes widened when he looked at me, and then he started scratching his upper lip. Oh, hey, is that you, Gino? You've really grown, he said with feigned surprise. Yes, and you don't seem to have changed, Mr. Jess, I said with my best smile. Or would you rather I call you Rookie like I used to in the big forest? I said looking into his eyes. Jess' eyes widened even more, his lip trembled and he clenched his fists. But all this happened in less than a second because the next moment he smiled again and patted me on the shoulder. He, of course, boss? He said as he looked into my eyes. Wow, it seems like you two are very close, Elinalise said amused. Of course, the rookie took me from the Great Forest to Millis when the mana disaster happened. I owe him a lot after all, I said. Hee, I appreciate it, my friend, he said and turned away. Now I'll take you to Paul, he muttered, and we followed him. Paul was staying in the corner of the city. The building was built with mud and stone and was meant for B-rank adventurers. At least it wasn't luxurious or noisy. When we got to the entrance, Jess told us, listen carefully, we got here about 6 months ago but our progress hasn't been the best. Please, Elinalise, I know you have a lot of things to say, but save it this time. I can't promise anything, she said with a frown and shaking her head. Jess forced a smile and shrugged, leaving it at that. However, this was Elinalise we were talking about. She wasn't going to suddenly become hostile and aggressive. Okay, let's go in, Jess said, and we entered. There was no door, just a curtain that separated the inside from the outside. The first floor was basically like all the ones I had seen. With those tables for people to eat at, the materials used to build those tables were different, as was their arrangement, but apart from that it was the same. I recognized Paul at a glance. He was gathered in a group with other people. The guy looked serious but also had a tired face. Next to him were Lilia and a hooded woman. It was Shiera, right? All the faces were full of tiredness. Lilia was the first to recognize us and whispered something in Paul's ear. He immediately turned his head in our direction, and when he saw Elinalise he frowned. Itching. Elinalise stood on a nearby chair, looking completely indifferent. Paul slowly turned towards her and their eyes met. This was bad. Ahem. Good afternoon, Mr. Greyrat. My name is Gino Britzes. I am a friend of Jess and I came with Miss Elinalise to help you with the matter of your missing wife, I said with a bow. Paul ignored me and made his way to Elinalise. She looked at him, her hands clenched into fists, and stood up as well. Elinalise looked at Paul. He was a head taller than her. The air was thick with tension. Volatile was the word that came to mind. Maybe they would end up punching each other? Maybe they would try to kill each other. Shit, was their relationship really that bad? Jess. I looked at him for help, but the idiot just shrugged his shoulders helplessly and gave an infuriating smile. This man really is worthless? Elinalise. Paul murmured. Yeah, what's wrong? She said in a cold tone. Paul then looked at me. I gave him a small smile with a bow. He looked away from me and then looked at Lilia and Shiera. There seemed to be some meaning behind his gaze, but I couldn't figure it out. Suddenly, Paul got down on his knees. Then he rested his forehead on the ground. He was crawling. I'm sorry about what happened back then, he said. Elinalise refused to look at him. She turned her head to the side, and then, She pouted, puffing out her cheeks. Well, I guess I was partly to blame then, she said. Paul continued to prostrate himself. I've caused you a lot of trouble since the mana disaster happened. I'm so sorry, he said. It's okay. I also had someone I wanted to look for, so it was convenient, she said. Ugh. Paul let out a long sigh, stood up from the ground and dusted off his knees. He then looked back at Elinalize, who softly smiled back at him. Age hasn't been kind, she said. It has been to you. You're as beautiful as ever, he said, nodding. Oh boy, I'll tell Zenith you said that, she said. That means I'll get to see her get jealous again, he joked. Something to look forward to, I'm sure, she replied. They both laughed. It was nice to see them like this. They painted a nice picture together. A beautiful elf and a tired middle-aged espishin. Still, it's impressive that you were able to endure the trip all the way here. It's a long way from the Northern Territories to here, isn't it? Paul asked. Yes it is, but I had help, she said, patting me on the shoulder. Paul looked at me and raised an eyebrow. Who is this? He said, bewildered. My name is Gino Britzes. I came to help my friend Jess. He sent me a letter asking for help, so I came with Miss Elinalize, I said. Paul's expression turned into one of doubt, his gaze traveling between me and Jess. Monkey face, how can this child help us? Paul said in a sharp tone. Don't be so hard on Boss Paul. This child seems stupid, but he is a very skilled swordsman, even more skilled than you, Jess said, and at this Paul crossed his arms. That's true, Paul. Without him I would have died in the desert, Elinalize intervened. That reminds me, surely you slept with him, right? Paul said with a mocking smile. I only ensured my survival, Elinalize answered, and Paul let out a laugh at this. Also, to verify my skills, I showed my adventurer card to Paul and he believed me. Minimally. Even so, after all this hustle and bustle, we were here and it was time to rescue Zenith. And Roxy too, apparently. Chapter 56 Preparations. Paul began to explain the details of how he had gotten here, though I already knew the gist. Roxy and Talhand met up with him in Milishan, then gathered what information they could and crossed the sea to the Bigarret continent. Thanks to the number of members in their group, they were able to reach Rapan, where they met up with Jess and found out where Zenith was. According to Jess' information, Zenith is 1 day north of here, trapped in a labyrinth, Paul muttered. For 6 whole years? Elinalize asked in disbelief. I don't know. Paul shook his head. Is she still alive? She muttered worriedly. I don't know. There was a group that went in there a few years ago and apparently one of the members said that they saw a person who looked like Zeni. Besides, we haven't heard from them since they went back into the labyrinth, Paul muttered in a somber tone. I instinctively looked at Jess. He was the one responsible for bringing that information, and it was obviously from that bastard Itagami. The guy shuddered and intervened. All we have is secondhand information, so we don't know. Maybe she's dead. Maybe she's being possessed by some monster. All we have is that she was seen in that labyrinth, he said. This labyrinth is very old and difficult. In these past 6 months, we've dived in it numerous times, but it's always been tough. We have 4 professional labyrinth divers in our group, but we're not even halfway there yet. Paul muttered. Do you have company? A voice said from the entrance of the inn. Oh, it seems I missed a touching reunion, huh? Another voice said it was Talhand and Vieira, both carrying sacks on their backs. They looked like purchases. The Talhand's robust body swayed as he approached. He inspected me from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. Are you Paul's son? He asked. No, I'm a friend of Jess and I came to help. My name is Gino Britzes. I said, okay, nice to meet you, he said, leaving his bag on a table. Gino, you better stay away from him. Steal what men value most, Elinalize said, pulling my arm. I thought this smelled too much like a woman, Talhand said, looking at Elinalize with disgust. What is this, huh? So you came too? He continued. Well, you say I shouldn't have? She replied mockingly. Of course, just the fact that you're here causes trouble. Talhand spat, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a glass bottle of wine. He removed the cork and drank it in one gulp. Pwah. This is a drink that will give you a good punch in the guts, Talhand said, passing the bottle to Elinalize. She took the bottle without saying anything and took a drink. She didn't drink as much as he did, but I could still see how her pale white throat moved as she swallowed twice and then burped. A very indecent alcohol. she muttered. It goes perfectly with someone like you, Talhand replied, putting the bottle back in his pocket. Well, now that everyone is here, let's continue where we left off, shall we? Paul's voice echoed. Wait, did you say everyone? What about Roxy? Elinalise asked. Paul's face darkened as she asked, and it wasn't just him, everyone else had the same look. The long-eared beauty seemed to realize what he meant, and her eyes widened. What? It can't be, she muttered. A month ago, Roxy was caught by one of the traps in the labyrinth, Paul muttered. She's not dead, right? Elinalise muttered, no, she stepped into a teleportation circle and disappeared. We haven't confirmed her death. It's very likely that she's still alive in the labyrinth. Paul said, come on, Paul, it's not possible. I understand that we're talking about Roxy, but that's not the kind of place where a mage can survive alone. Sure, maybe she's still alive, but the chances are... No, Roxy isn't your average mage. There's a good chance that she's still alive, Talhand said, interrupting Jess. You say that, but we've been searching for the whole month and we haven't found her. We've been there 5 times and nothing. Jess replied, you're still at it? But we all remember how you looked like a lovebird with her. Talhand spat, you two shut up. How long are you going to keep doing this? Besides, she was more than your friend, right, Jess? Paul shouted and everyone fell silent. I just stared at Jess and he shrugged his shoulders fearfully. Fucking monkey, son of a bitch? I see where this is going. Paul, Jess, and Talhand started arguing amongst themselves. This kind of scenario brings back bad memories. I'm sorry to interrupt the conversation, but let's go back to where we were, please. I don't know this Roxy and I don't know about her capabilities, but now we have a challenge in front of us. What kind of place is this labyrinth? I asked. The 3 exchanged glances. It was as if they were in a conference to see who would be the one to transmit the information. Paul finally opened his mouth. A teleportation labyrinth. At that moment Elinalise's drooping ears stood up like antennas and she immediately started searching through her luggage and pulled out a book. I can't believe there are so many that were outside this one, she muttered as she put the book on the table. The title, A Tale for the Exploration of the Teleportation Labyrinth. If the labyrinth spoken of here matches the one we're about to enter, then this might help us orient ourselves, Elinalise said. When she said that, Paul's eyes widened. Wait, Elinalise, why do you have a book like that? I thought it might be useful. Rudeus recommended it to me in college as a light read. She said, I see. He replied, I'd like to go over the contents of the book. If it seems like it might be useful, let's use it, Paul said, taking the book in his hands, and after taking a long look at the cover he immediately passed it to Jess. He held it and turned to Elinalise. I'll go ahead and read it then, okay? Please do so, Paul said. Mr. Greyrat, while Jess reads that, I'd like you to tell me about the labyrinth, I said as I sat down in front of him. Call me Paul. Kid, pay close attention, he said with a smile. Let's start with the monsters. There were 5 types in the labyrinth, but Paul had only reached the 3rd floor, so there were some beasts he hadn't seen yet. But the ones he could remember were Death Tarantula, a huge poisonous spider iron caterpillar, heavy and resistant and shaped like a tank. Mud Skull, a human-shaped monster covered in mud armored warrior, a rusty armor with 4 arms devil devourer, a beast with knife-like fangs. There are also about 7 floors in the labyrinth. The 1st floor is where the spiders created their numerous webs. The 2nd floor was occupied by a large number of spiders and ants. On the 3rd floor, the Mud Skulls took command of the aforementioned monsters. By the time they reached the 4th floor, the spiders and caterpillars were practically absent, leaving only the Mud Skulls and the armored warriors. On the 5th floor, the Mud Skulls disappeared and only the armored warriors and the devouring devils remained. And from the 6th floor onwards there were only devouring devils. Or so the book said. The first 3 floors were part of an ant nest, complex, winding paths with rooms connecting at the end. Apparently the teleportation circles were always at the bottom of these rooms. According to the book, the labyrinth turned into a stone ruin around the 4th floor, but Paul and his group hadn't gotten that far. Lastly, the shape of the teleportation circles, carved into the ground, were complex, strange shapes that emitted a pale light. And in short, most of what Paul said matched what was written in the book. This is amazing. Elinalyze. You've brought us something amazing. The moment Paul finished his explanation, Jess closed the book with a dry noise and raised his voice in excitement. Hey Jess, is it really that amazing? Paul murmured as he saw how elated the macaque was. Yes. It's amazing, Paul. Everything written here is true. We basically have a map of the place up to the 6th floor. Jess said excitedly and handed the book to Talhand. All the things we didn't understand are written in that book. Which circles to jump over, which circles to stay away from, which ones will take us where, and what we'll face when we use them. The monkey said, almost shouting. Paul's face turned gloomy as he stared at Jess. I see. So, you can tell what happens to Zenith and Roxy based on what's written in that book? He said. Well, you know, Jess muttered with the emotion leaving his body in a second. Don't get too carried away. We can't make any more mistakes, Paul warned in a low voice. I understand what you're trying to say, Paul, but with this book and a reliable vanguard and rearguard, we'll be fine. Let's cheer up for a moment, shall we? Jess said. Paul looked him in the eyes for a moment and then sighed. Yes, you're right, I'm sorry, he said, and a serene smile appeared on his face. As much as he felt cornered, it was important to keep his composure. Paul had to understand that. Very well. Then, if you're done reading, let's decide our formation, Paul said in an energetic voice. The atmosphere in the room improved. Only 5 members would dive into the labyrinth: Paul, Elinalyze, Jess, Talhan, and I. The labyrinth is very narrow, so if more were to enter, we would get in each other's way. Elinalyze was the tank, Paul was a secondary attacker, I was the offense and healing, and Talhand could be the secondary tank or tertiary attacker. His role was a bit vague, but he could do intermediate-level earth magic as well as being a versatile warrior. We'll take care of each other, Talhand said, giving me a pat on the lower back that gave me chills. Generally, Gino will take care of the healing after each battle, and besides, according to Elinalyze, you are a skilled swordsman. Can you do it? Paul muttered. No problem, I said with a smile. Attack and healing, it was my first time in a labyrinth and I still had work to do. That said, it was more or less the same as when I did my adventurer jobs in the sacred land of the sword. I wonder how everyone is doing there. I would leave most of the preparations to the professionals, Talhand and Elinalyze. I was still an amateur when it came to this. I could use knowledge from my previous life to come up with various strategies, but I would leave that aside for the moment. Our first objective will be to reach the 3rd floor. Once there, we will locate Roxy, Paul said. I had no idea how she would be, but due to her strong destiny I wasn't that worried. My main concern was that bastard Jess. I'll have to talk to him tonight. Chapter 57 Entrance to the Labyrinth. After we all agreed on our positions to enter the labyrinth, it was time to rest. Elinalyze and I stayed at the same inn where Paul was, but I went out into the city because I had a lot of unfinished business. In addition, I told Elinalyze that I wanted to buy more equipment to prepare for the labyrinth, but I obviously didn't know how much money I would need. However, I didn't need to say anything more about why. Shortly after, she gave me a bag full of small colored crystals. She said, "Don't ask where I got them from, just use them as best you can." But obviously, I already knew where these things came from. It was the product of his curse. She practically gives birth to these crystals after the semen fertilizes her egg. If this did not happen, the excess mana inside her would turn her into stone from the inside out. But enough of that. Now, besides needing to buy equipment, I need to talk to the monkey face. It was already nighttime, so Paul's group retired to their rooms except for me and Jessie. We were both on the inn's 1st floor in separate corners of the building. Jessie tried not to look at me and I could see that he was nervous. So I ran a little and reached him at the speed of light. "What the hell?" he screamed, startled when she appeared in front of him. "This is nothing. You should see me when I use my sword," I said as I put my hand on my hilt. "Ha, what are you talking about, boy? You scared me," he murmured. I looked around and luckily we were the only ones there. "Listen to me carefully, you fucking idiot. What did you do with Roxy?" I said while conjuring a stone bullet on my finger. Jess turned pale as he looked at me. "I was just following orders. Calm down. Her destiny is strong. She is still alive," he murmured in fear. "The faceless bastard ordered you to do it?" I said as the stone bullet began to spin faster. Don't give me that shit. Are you here because of him too? Besides, you should be more grateful. If I had said I didn't know you, this whole farce of yours would have gone to hell. Jess shouted in a defiant tone, but his tone wavered a little at the end. Answer the question. I shouted. Yes. He told me to do it. Don't worry. I made her go to an area without too many monsters. She'll be fine. The macaque muttered. You expect me to believe you? And what was all that stuff Paul and Talhan said about you being like a bird in love with her? I said, and the stone bullet began to slowly advance towards Jess. That was before you confirmed your coming. It was a plan B, but that girl is only interested in humans. Jess explained. I raised an eyebrow at this as I stared at him. I don't like you. You think you owe something to Hidegami when he destroyed your entire family. Let it be clear to you that I only do this for the good of my family. If I discover that you want to attack me from behind, I'll kill you. I screamed, and the stone bullet shot out, cutting Jess' cheek slightly. The guy started shaking like crazy while looking at me. Now then, let's act like the good friends we are from tomorrow on, okay? I said with a smile as I patted him on the shoulder and walked out of the inn. I glanced over and saw Jess falling to his knees on the ground. Well, that should do for now. I arrived at the market shortly after. My first goal was to exchange the crystals that Elinalise gave me. I was thinking of exchanging half of them for money and using some of them and returning the rest of the money to Elinalise. Fortunately, a single crystal gave me a total of 10,000 sincha, so 3 would be enough, I think. Phoenix Dragon would be enough for most cases, but my goal was another. It was a small dagger, one that can cut metal more easily the harder the structure is. Luckily I realized that Paul hadn't bought this artifact yet, so it was still my chance. But it wasn't easy at all. I spent about an hour searching through the entire Rapan market until I almost gave up. But just as I was about to return home, I noticed that a butcher was trying to cut meat with a knife without success. Don't tell me. I quickly approached the place to see what the man was doing. Good evening, sir. I see you are having difficulties with meat, I said. The man looked at me, sweat dripping from his forehead, and he clicked his tongue. That damn thing, no matter how much I sharpened it, it doesn't cut anything. The man shouted. Well, that's a shame. Then could you sell me the one? I muttered. This is garbage? Take it, it's useless to me. I spent 800 sincha on this. He shouted, throwing the dagger at me. I bowed to him and ran out of the market until I reached the inn area. I had gotten this legendary weapon for free. Try testing it with a nearby rock to see the result. The blade of the sword penetrated the stone like butter, making a perfect cut. Then I tried to lightly cut my arm with the dagger, but absolutely nothing happened. Perfect! I have the perfect weapon to fight the Hydra. I shouted with excitement. Now we just have to wait until tomorrow to see how things turn out? At first glance, the teleportation labyrinth was nothing more than a cave, nothing special about it from the outside except for the spider webs that covered the walls, courtesy of the spiders that resided in the area. Other than that, it just looked like a hole in the side of a cliff. Okay, everyone will do this just like we discussed, understood? Paul asked. Understood, I said. Paul smiled and nodded. We got into formation just like we talked about the day before and entered. It was my first time in a labyrinth and I didn't feel much excitement. Stay safe, my lord, Lilia said. Please be careful, everyone. Lilia, Vera, and Shiera were returning to the city on horseback when the great clans entered a labyrinth to conquer it. Their Apodo members would camp outside, but there was no need for that here. Well, let's go, Paul said, and so we entered the labyrinth. The interior was dark, but not completely. There was a dim glow, but such poor visibility was not ideal. It could be fatal, not counting the fact that we must always carry torches. On the first floor, we navigated through what looked like an ant nest. There were silk cobwebs on the walls and ceilings, and further inside there was a magic circle that emanated a pale light. Paul, you said to be careful because some of the magic circles don't light up, right? I asked. That's right, Gino. Make sure you follow Jess's footprints precisely, he replied. The stupid monkey was 10 steps ahead of us. He was wearing a special pair of boots. It had cross-shaped steel plates mounted on the soles, leaving cross-shaped footprints wherever he walked. It was not a magic object, but a product of the wisdom of adventurers. It was easy to spot the teleportation circles on the first floor. The main monster on this floor was the huge tarantula, but there was a variation of smaller spiders that flooded the floor. The sight of this would make anyone with arachnophobia faint. Also, in the middle of these swarms, there were completely empty spaces, circular or square in shape. These were the traps. If one set foot in that empty space to avoid crushing the spiders, they would immediately be teleported to some random place. So we had no choice but to squash the little spiders wherever we stepped. It wasn't pleasant, but what else could we do? As for the rank B beasts, the tarantulas from the Road of Death, they didn't appear in the corridor. Once in a while one or two would come out, but when Jess saw them, Paul easily dispatched them, so there was no need to do anything for the moment. Well, this is a piece of cake, Paul said. He had his sword in his hand and walked briskly. Like taking candy from a baby, Paul muttered as he cleanly cut a tarantula in half. I could only guess that the guy was bragging. Paul, I don't know what you're planning, but I warn you that Gino is a much better swordsman than you, Elinalise said. Paul raised an eyebrow at this and looked at me. Yes, you're so sure of this. Why don't we change positions now that we're on the first floor? Paul said disdainfully as he looked at me. Don't even think about it. It's dangerous. Talhand warned. Relax, we already know this floor like the back of our hands. What are you saying, Gino? Paul said as he walked towards me. Elinalise remained negative at this, but we ended up changing places. We passed in front of the spider nests and jumped into the teleportation circle located further inside. We finally reached the spider nest, and it was time to test my skills. While Paul and Elinalise pounced on the spiders, I cut a total of 10 spiders with a long sword of light. Paul nearly tripped over his feet as he felt the shockwave and looked at me with wide eyes. That was? He muttered. I told you, he's a sword emperor, Elinalise said as she returned to her position. Paul muttered something to himself and had his shoulders slumped. I think I just broke his confidence. Well, who cares, that way he'll focus more. It took us about an hour to get to each magic circle, as we had already done it 5 times. That meant that about 5 hours had passed. The last area of the first one was a room covered in cobwebs, inside which there were 2 circles aligned. Their color was a little more intense than the others we had seen, and they were also large. For newbies like me, either of the 2 looked like the real one. However, there was a rock with a circle inscribed on it placed immediately before one of the circles. This was something that Jess had left as a sign that it was the correct one. Once we consulted the book and confirmed that everything was in order, we climbed onto it. From there we went to the second floor. On the second floor, the spiders on the ground that were crawling around disappeared and the tarantula nests were greatly reduced. Now you could see the ground. Instead of spiders, we now had a huge steel caterpillar, the iron caterpillar, crawling around. It was 1 meter wide and 2 meters long, which gave it a robust appearance. Just as its name suggested, the creature had extremely tough skin, but with a long sword of light, it was like cutting butter. But contrary to their appearance, they were quite fast. Their speed reminded me more of a centipede. They also seemed to have an alliance with the spiders that threw webs from the rear while using the caterpillars as a shield. Once you were caught in those webs, the heavy 1-ton caterpillar would trample you. I had no problems with the caterpillars, unlike Paul and Elinalise, so we ended up making a strategy. They distract them while I finish off the spiders and finally the caterpillars. I practically started taking the position of the main attacker, and Paul and Elinalise served as support. Although with my skills there is nothing to complain, hee. Nothing to do, huh? I said with a mocking smile. Talhand grumbled for being bored. He was by my side just in case, to make sure his services weren't needed. Damn it. Paul grumbled. These damn things are sticky. Elinalise muttered. The tarantulas started to overwhelm them at a certain point and they got caught in spiderwebs. It wasn't a big problem since I was practically taking care of everything. So Jess was able to free them both from the webs with a corrosive liquid. Although the liquid did not cause any damage to the skin, Elinalise complained that it irritated her skin. So after all this, we moved on to the 3rd floor. Chapter 58. Very easy. Okay, let's take a break here, Jess said when we finished fighting. We had reached the 3rd floor a little while ago and we had encountered more iron tracks, but I was able to finish them off quickly. Talhand and Elinalise stood guard. I decided to clean my sword and dagger, and Paul took off his armor and belt and also cleaned the blood off his sword. I noticed Paul's gaze on my sword as I rested. "That sword is very nice. Where did you get it?" he said. The big one. It was a gift from my master, the sword god. I got it when I became a sword king," I said. Paul just nodded and looked away, but I could hear him clicking his tongue as he muttered things to himself. "The god of the sword? You trained with the god of the sword himself? But when? You're too young, and according to you, you only returned home 5 years ago." Talhand asked, and all eyes turned to me except for Jess. "That's easy. My family, seeing that my home Roa had disappeared, we moved and ended up in the sacred land of the sword. I was already at an advanced level by then, but with only 2 years of training I managed to get to where I am now, and when I reached the level of emperor I decided to go on adventures. I received Jess' letter and now I'm here," I said. Elinalize nodded to herself while Talhand looked at me curiously. "If you say that you are a monstrously talented boy, you could even become the next god of the sword," he said. "That's the plan. First I must spread my name and then I will take the title," I said in a solemn tone which caused Elinalize and Talhand to laugh. "I guess that will do for now. This fucking thing won't come off." Paul started cursing as he desperately tried to clean the bodily fluids, or whatever that grime was stuck to his armor. "Why don't you try that liquid that Mr. Jess used on the second floor?" I said. "It's to remove cobwebs, right?" "Will it work?" he asked. "We don't lose anything by trying," I said. Jess gave Paul some of the substance and he resumed his furious rubbing on his armor, and when he was done, the armor was left white and shiny like the detergent ads from my old world. "Oh, it's gone." "Thanks," he said. "You're welcome," I said. "So it's detergent, huh? I should ask where they sell this stuff, so I could take a few liters back to the sacred land of the sword and wash my clothes properly." Paul re-equipped his armor as soon as he finished cleaning it, then he unsheathed his sword and walked over to Jess. Jess pulled out some papers from his bag and put them on the floor. I walked over to them to see, and as they didn't say anything, I just stood there. One of the maps was well drawn, while the other was still partially finished. "We'll soon reach the place where Roxy separated from us. If we're lucky, she should still be around that area," Jess muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Very well," Paul replied. "According to the book, teleport traps only sent people to areas on the same floor. Even if it was called random teleport, it wouldn't suddenly teleport you right in front of the boss on the last floor. We had no idea what circle Roxy was on, but if she was still alive, it was very likely that she was still on this floor." "Where did she teleport to?" I asked. "Over there," Jess muttered, pointing to a dark hallway. When I tried to get a better look, I couldn't see anything. I sneaked up to the place and the circle looked like a simple drawing on the floor. It didn't emit any glow or anything like that, and that was terrifying. "Let's look to the east. We have no idea where she is and we need to find her quickly," Paul said. "Frankly, without Roxy in my mix, we couldn't even get to the second floor. This is all thanks to you, boss," Jess said with a nervous smile. "I think so," I answered. "The monsters in this labyrinth are resistant to earth magic, which is Talhan's specialty. Paul was the main damage dealer in the group, but when he gets wrapped in webs he can't cover his position well. Vieira wasn't very reliable either and couldn't cover the others as well as Elinalize. To get through here you need someone who can use water and fire magic. It wasn't surprising that they were stuck without Roxy. In fact, it was a miracle that they had been able to get out of here without her. I thought we could manage somehow, but there aren't many magicians in this area, and not a single one with the guts to brave the teleportation maze," Jess said nervously. After that, Paul and Jess confirmed the route they would take next. The map he had created was easy to understand, but compared to the first and second floors, this map had several sections missing. Zenith was in the boss area, but he had no idea where Roxy was. "Jess, where are we now?" Elinalize suddenly entered the conversation. "We're here right now," Jess replied, pointing at a spot on the map. "Then we're close to the fourth floor," she replied. "Yes, we've advanced at a fast pace, but we'll still look for Roxy around here," he replied. "Monsters that change formation halfway through, this is one nasty maze," she said. "You can be sure of that," Jess replied with a nod. Elinalize ran a hand through her hair, her usual proud curls looking somewhat messy. "By the way, Jess, Why do you call Gino chief? Hee hee. It turns out we were both locked up in prisons in the Great Forest. Rudeus was there too, he said. A prison in the Great Forest? How the hell did that happen? She said confused. I'll tell you more about that when we get home, Jess said. And so 10 hours passed since we entered here. I must say that we advanced quickly, but now we are searching the 3rd floor for any trace of Roxy. I thought it would take us several days to go deep here, I muttered. It would if we didn't have a map, Paul said casually. For a couple of hours, there was nothing but spider webs on the walls, but there were few signs of life. Plip, plip, plip. Suddenly I heard the dripping of water. The sound of small drops of water reached my ears. I muttered as I looked at the place where the sound came from. Gino. Elise muttered as she watched me walk. I arrived at the place where the sound came from. It was a small room, and to my surprise, the drops were falling from the wall, not the ceiling. By this point, the entire group was already in the room as they looked at me bewildered. Gino? What's wrong? Did you discover something? Paul asked. Is it normal for there to be leaks? I asked while pointing to the place where the water was coming out. No, it shouldn't, it can't be. Paul answered alarmed. I touched the drop that was coming out and it was cold. Do you think she could be on the other side? Elise muttered. I don't know, Rookie, do you know what's on the other side of this wall? I said, no, we haven't explored that place. He muttered. I was silent for a few moments. I didn't have the same connection with her as Rudeus, so I can't say for sure if she's on the other side. I'll make a hole in the wall. I'll do it slowly. I muttered while concentrating on the mana in my hands. Roxy PV. I heard a small sound and my eyes snapped open. Everything around me was dark and narrow. Yes, that's right, this place was narrow. After being warped numerous times, I had arrived here, in a space no bigger than a crib. There was only room for me to lie down here. As long as I was inside this small, narrow space, no monster could teleport in. I sat on the edge of the space and leaned against the wall contemplating what was in front of me. A magic circle that emitted a pale light, a teleportation circle. If I set a single foot in it, it would send me somewhere I didn't know. Probably to a monster's lair or a place filled with dozens of monsters. In short, to my death. My biological clock told me that I had already spent a month here. I had stumbled. I could make up the excuse that it wasn't my fault. I was evading an attack aimed at me and tripped over Jess, so I slipped and my foot found a magic circle. Even though I had checked where the traps were before heading into battle, I had easily stepped on one. The beasts in this labyrinth knew exactly where the teleportation circles led to. This was their lair after all. The trap was set so the beasts would feast on unsuspecting adventurers. I defeated them all, but still, my mana wasn't infinite. Eventually, it would run out, even when my mana was reduced to half. The wave of enemies didn't stop, and the corpses piled up, but still more beasts came closer. I was completely cornered. Help wasn't coming. Maybe they had abandoned me? But they're not that kind. Even when I felt tears threatening to flow, I kept fighting desperately, even when I felt my mana starting to decrease. It was then that I saw a light, 6 magic circles contained in a large room. Monsters appeared in all the circles except one, maybe because there were no monsters at the other end. I had to choose, or die. I used what I had left of my mana to defeat the horde and then jumped over the circle, which took me to where I was sitting. I could make all the water I needed with magic, and I had food in my backpack. I could recover my mana here and then find a way to escape. With that thought, I stayed where I was. How many times had I repeated the cycle at this point? 5, 10 times? The circle in front of me always sent me to a different place when I stepped on it, but in the end, I always ended up coming back here. My heart and mind were at their limit. My body was, as expected, exhausted. A month and no progress. I was just going in circles. My joints hurt. I was out of food. The monsters were tough and tasted horrible. Their meat was so toxic that you had to use detox magic just to eat it, and I could feel that it was sapping my stamina. I felt cornered. I had no idea what was going to happen next. If there were more enemies next time, or if they coordinated their attacks better, they would tear me limb from limb and devour me once I used the last of my mana. I could feel it. There would be no next time. For the first time, I was aware of my death. My corpse would never be, the beasts would leave nothing of me to find. I would die and there would be nothing of me left to prove my existence. It was terrifying. I was terrified. Before I knew it, I was grinding my teeth, tears were pouring from my eyes, I felt like screaming as I gripped my staff tightly. I still hadn't accomplished anything, there was still so much I wanted to do. I had a dream, that's right, a dream. I wanted to be a teacher. I loved teaching people. I had no talent for it, but I enjoyed it. That's why once this was over and we rescued Zenith, I planned to take the teacher exam at Sharia's Magic University to become a teacher. I wanted to try normal happiness. If I became a teacher, I could even get married, I could fall in love with a man, marry him and spend passionate nights together. Ha! A self-deprecating laugh slipped from my lips. I couldn't believe that I would allow myself to give free rein to such fantasies, even under these circumstances. I was going to die. None of my dreams were going to come true, my death would be miserable. There was no one left to save me. I had never heard of anyone in my situation being saved. I don't want to die. Chapter 59 Her Emotional Perspective. Roxy POV. My instincts were right, I was teleported to an unknown passage, where I left symbols to mark previously undiscovered circles. I passed through numerous other circles and then, as if predetermined, I found myself back in the guard of a monster. At a glance, I knew it was impossible. The beasts had piled up the bodies of their brethren to block my escape route, and it seemed the space at the other end of the circle was too narrow for the monsters to teleport through. I had no choice but to clear the way if I wanted to use it to escape. While I faced this hour, I asked myself. They were in an impeccable formation, branching around the mountain of corpses blocking my escape, protecting it. The iron caterpillar situated right in front of me moved as if it was engaged in defense. In contrast, the tarantulas situated behind began to spit out their webs to hinder my movements. Even further back there was a large human form covered in mud that was throwing rocks at me. They're almost like an army, I thought as I began to accumulate my mana. Wrap me in the magnificent earth armor, Fertile de Tierra. I created a shield with the earth that surrounded me. It wrapped around me, covering my body up to my head in the shape of a dome. I cut the spell before my entire body was consumed. As long as it rose to my neck, it would be enough to prevent the iron caterpillar from attacking me. Spread the falling drops, cover the world with water. Waterfall. Countless spheres of water formed around me, transforming into bullets that shot through the air. It was an extremely weak spell, only suitable for temporarily stopping its movement. Knowing that, I immediately began the second incantation. Blue goddess descending from the heavens, wield your staff and cover this world in frost, icicle field. The water droplets that were previously raining down on the creatures' faces now crackled as they froze. This was a combination of the waterfall and icicle field spells, and it froze the entire enemy's front line. From there, I continued to cast my magic on them. King of Frost, supreme ruler of the Arctic lands, sovereign wrapped in all white whose icy cold steals all warmth, freeze your enemy, O icy king who rules death, blizzard. I finished my abbreviated incantation. Usually, I used this spell to unleash icy spears around me, but now they spread out in a radial fashion, rising above those I had frozen and impaling the beasts lurking around them. In reality, I wasn't going to defeat the front line. They were frozen statues that would act as a wall between me and the rest of their comrades while I struck those behind with advanced magic. These were the same tactics I used when I went through that labyrinth near Chiron. They guaranteed victory, however, as soon as those in the rear died, more monsters appeared through the magic circles of the room, stepping over their fallen comrades. The place was once again filled with beasts in the blink of an eye. My heart was also filled with despair. I guess it really is useless, I muttered. If I didn't move those corpses, I wasn't going to get out of here, but there were too many for me alone to handle. Grr! The clay skull was throwing rocks at me from a distance. It had already destroyed part of my earthen fortress, and the slow iron caterpillar was getting closer and closer to me. A chill ran down my spine. I felt a cold sweat coming over me. Take your burning sword and pierce your enemy. Cut the flame. A sword of fire flew through the air, Scorching the worm's shell, the creature writhed in pain before it died. Iron tracks were vulnerable to fire, and using fire magic in a cave could end up signing your own death sentence, but still, I had no other choice. Wrap me in the magnificent earth armor, Earth Fortress. Once again, I created a wall of earth. My mana was decreasing, and I began to panic. What should I do? How was I going to get out of here? Think. I said to myself. I racked my brains, while I continued to cast magic and push my enemies away, but nothing came to mind. Was I trapped? Was this the end? Was I really going to die here? My body went on autopilot, defeating my enemies for me while I entertained myself in my thoughts. My feet stumbled, my mind was confused, and I could feel my mana running out. I only had a few spells left before I passed out. No! I gripped my staff tightly. I don't want to die, I don't want to die. I felt like my whole life was flashing before me. My first memory was the look of disappointment on my parents' faces when they realized I was the only person in our quiet village who couldn't converse mentally with anyone else. They taught me to talk because they felt sorry for me. As for magic, I started learning it after a traveling magician passed through our village and left a deep impression on me. I headed to the central continent, where I met many people and discovered and enrolled in Sharia's Magic University. I met my teacher after several years there. He was the one who taught me holy level water magic. I learned it so easily that it went to my head. Because I became conceited, I fought with my teacher, and when I graduated, I left without saying anything. After that, I headed to the capital of the Azura Kingdom, sure that someone as exceptional as me could find work there. I was wrong. Unable to find work, I moved to the countryside, but I didn't find work there either. I was left not knowing what to do when I found a recruitment ad for a home tutor. That's how I met Paul and his family, including Rudy. Watching Paul's numerous sexual encounters excited me. Rudy's talent amazed me. I was jealous, but I also felt a growing respect for him since, unlike me, he didn't let it go to his head. Before leaving, I taught him saint-level water magic. Next, I began to delve into a labyrinth near the Chiron Kingdom. There I was hired by Prince Pax, a task that reminded me once again how incredible Rudeus was, as well as how little talent I had as a teacher. Then came Rudy's letter. I worked tirelessly to put together a textbook on the demon god's language for him. When my work became too unpleasant, I left the Chiron Kingdom. It was then that I learned about the mana disaster, and met Elinalise and Talhand, two people with such unrestrained behavior that it shocked me, and we set off together to the demon continent, where I met my parents and confirmed that they really loved me. Then I met Kishirika, and after that, all those memories flashed through my mind in an instant. An iron caterpillar was heading toward me. Thanks to my fire magic, the room had warmed up, and the effects of the frost nova were disappearing. I can't do it, I don't want to die, I don't want to do it. No! I screamed. No! No! I swung my staff uselessly. The spider webs came flying towards me. Wrapping it, in a moment, they ripped it out of my hand. I don't want to die, please, someone, anyone. Help me! I stepped back, but there was only a wall behind me. The iron caterpillar was approaching. No, not one, many. I had nothing left to do. They were going to eat me alive, right? Anything but that. Someone please. Oh, the iron caterpillar was already here. I closed my eyes suddenly at the advance of the caterpillar. I guess I won't be able to see my mother and father anymore. That was the last thought I had. I waited a bit, but in the end it didn't come. Maybe it had died instantly, maybe it was already over. No, that couldn't be, but I didn't even hate to hear anything. Was this the other life? Timidly, I opened my eyes, and an unimaginable panorama stretched out before me. Before me, all the monsters were split in half. The iron caterpillar that came towards me was broken into pieces. There was nothing else. Everything had become silent again. What? I took my staff while looking around. There it is. It's alive. A male voice echoed around the place. I couldn't identify it. I didn't know who it was. Then I heard more noises and footsteps. Where is it? Paul's voice echoed around the place, and a man entered my field of vision. A young man came walking towards me, dodging the ice statues. As soon as I saw him, my heart started to beat hard, and I felt the blood rush to my face, heating my cheeks. This man was my ideal type. He was tall, with brown hair and masculine features. He wore a kind of short black tunic and held a nice sword. He was very well built, and there was a look of relief on his face as he looked at me. "Are you okay?" he asked while holding out a hand to me. "Huh. I looked at him confused. I couldn't think straight, but by instinct, I took his hand. It was rough and calloused, the typical hand of an adventurer, but it was also warm and held me tightly. He helped me up while I could only look at him like a fool. The boy wrinkled his nose softly as he looked away. I could see that he covered his nose discreetly as he looked at the dead monsters. It was then that I realized something. I hadn't bathed at all in the last month. As soon as I realized, I backed up until I hit the wall. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Shit. I had done something terrible. After he took the trouble to save me. But I don't want him to think that I was stinky." "Gino, everything okay over there?" Elinali's voice called. "Huh? Elinali's? What is she doing here?" "Wait, my group is here. I'm so sorry. But I've been stuck here for a month and I haven't been able to get a proper wash," I muttered. "It doesn't matter, it's natural. Besides, your group needs you," he said, and the next moment the faces of Paul, Jess, Talhan and Elinali's came out from among the dead monsters. "Oh dear. I was so worried," Elinali's said as she hugged me. "I'm fine, all thanks to him," I muttered as I looked at the boy. "I'm glad you're okay, Roxy," Paul said. And Talhan just looked at me with a smile. "All right, it's time to go. We must get Roxy safe," Jess said, leaving the place. "Of course, Talhan, you haven't done anything so far. Carry Roxy back," Elinali said as our hug ended. He grumbled in response, but I could see that he was happy. However, in all this exchange I couldn't take my eyes off the boy. "And my name is Roxy Magurdia. If you don't mind, can I know your name too?" I murmured. The boy smiled at this, which made me more nervous. "Of course, nice to meet you. My name is Gino Britzes," he said. "Gino, it's a peculiar name." Chapter 60. The indomitable swordsman. Roxy was just as I remembered her. She looked the same, she behaved the same, although being trapped in the labyrinth for a whole month weakened her considerably. Her cheeks were gaunt and she had dark circles under her eyes. Her braids had come loose and her entire body was covered in dirt, making her look like a street urchin. But despite all that, she hadn't lost her spirit at all. Jess, seeing her condition, immediately asked us to leave, a prudent decision for that brat. Talhan carried Roxy on his back and we headed to the surface. "I'm sorry, Mr. Talhan, for causing so much trouble," Roxy said. "Don't worry, I have to help out sometimes too," he replied. "I don't stink, do I? I imagine it must be pretty bad after the whole month I spent here," she muttered. If I couldn't bear so much, I couldn't call myself an adventurer," Talhan said with a laugh. I listened from behind as we walked. The two had traveled together for a long time. Judging by the way they spoke, I could tell they trusted each other deeply. "Don't worry, Miss Roxy, it's just natural. Being here for so long isn't the most pleasant experience, let's say," I said. "I see," she said, looking at me out of the corner of her eye before looking away, blushing. "You have to be fucking me up, motherfucker." Our group of innkeepers were glad to see Roxy back, probably because it was the first happy news they had since they started searching the labyrinth. It's true that we had only filled in the hole they had dug themselves, but I wasn't going to say that, regardless of the circumstances, this was a happy occasion. Lilia immediately took Roxy to get ready. We were going to rest for a few days to give Roxy time to regain her strength. That being said, she was an adventurer, she didn't have any major injuries, she was still strong enough to walk without help, and she swore that with good food and a soft bed, it was all she needed to sleep soundly and get back to normal in no time. Everything seemed to be going well. That being said, Roxy slept for a whole day. I couldn't blame her for that, given that she had spent a month in the monster-infested labyrinth. On the second day, Roxy got out of bed. It was right at lunchtime. She approached our table while we were eating, moving as stiffly as a robot. "Good morning, Miss Roxy," I said with a smile. "Yes, good morning, Mr. Gino," she replied, blushing. There were 4 of us, including me, at the table, the others being Elinali's, Paul and Talhan. Jess and the remaining 3 were currently shopping. The composition of our group was that the labyrinth group spent all their time resting while in town, and the waiting group ran errands in the meantime. Jess was part of the labyrinth group, but for some reason she took charge of the waiting group. Everyone, Roxy muttered, and everyone turned to look at her. Docilely, she looked at each of us, then bowed her head. I'm sorry I caused you trouble, but I'm fine now, she murmured. There were mixed reactions. Paul put his arm around her shoulder and said, no problem. Elise nodded and said, don't worry about it. Talhand gulped down the alcohol before pushing a bottle in her direction, and finally I could only nod with a smile. Also, if you want to thank someone, give it to Gino. If I hadn't discovered that remnant of your spell, you would never have met, Paul said. Roxy looked at me and bowed her head. Mr. Gino, what I mean is, thank you, she murmured, blushing completely. Don't worry, it was an act of charity, so to speak, and it was the most natural thing to do. Besides, don't call me sir, I haven't even reached the age of majority yet, I said. Roxy was visibly surprised by this and looked dejected. I see, then, thank you very much for saving me, Gino, she murmured. You're welcome, I said with a smile. Roxy blushed even more and muttered, but, does it seem like I'm being too familiar if I call you that? No problem, we'll be working in the same group for a while, it's best if we get comfortable, I said. Roxy blinked a few times. Yeah, you're right, you know. Anyway, your swordsmanship is spectacular, she muttered. Yeah, I am a sword emperor after all, I said with a mocking smile. Paul clicked his tongue in frustration, and Talhan and Elise laughed. Roxy's eyes widened as she looked at me. That's amazing, she muttered as she walked over to me and sat down next to me. I could see the spot on her scalp where her hair came out, which was cute. Now we have an amazing swordsman and the prodigy mage. What could be better? Paul grumbled. Don't say that. They could have managed just fine without me, she muttered. Have some confidence in yourself. If you hadn't been with us, we wouldn't be here, Talhan said. This seemed to lift Roxy's spirits. Jess came back after that and we continued our meeting. We all sat huddled at the table, the waiting group included. I said we'd wait to see how Roxy is doing, but I think we'll dive back in 3 days, Jess announced. Isn't that a little hasty? Paul asked. Although it may not seem like it, diving into the labyrinth really wears a person down, especially one like the teleportation labyrinth that is riddled with traps, forcing you to constantly watch where you step even when you were involved in a battle. It was already quite tiring for someone like me. It's better that Roxy goes back in sooner rather than later, Jess replied. Yes, I see what you mean, you're right. Paul nodded. I already knew what this was due to. They called it a curse, but it was actually post-traumatic stress syndrome. After that exchange, the others started to chime in. I can give you some tips on doing healing and offensive magic, Roxy whispered to me. We shouldn't repeat Gino's method. Even though it was slow, there was still a risk of collapse, Paul said. If you want, I can go ahead of you, Talhand replied. Jess kept the group organized as they shared their thoughts on the previous adventure as well as how we should approach the next one. Everyone was serious. They already looked like an S-rank group. In this meeting I couldn't contribute much, except answer when they asked me what I thought of my first labyrinth. They were professionals, I was an amateur. No matter how good I was with the sword, I couldn't forget those 2 things. For the moment, we'll focus on mapping the rest of the 3rd floor. Depending on how things go, we can at least go deep enough to find the circle of the 4th floor. What do you think? Jess said, okay, we said in unison. Usually, once a group discovered the stairs to the next floor, they would decide whether to go deeper or temporarily return to the surface. If they opted for the latter, they would take a straight path down to rejoin the march from the point they had left off upon returning. The same went for us. Last time we had gone straight down to the 3rd floor. If you weren't fast, there was a chance that the number of traps would increase. Speed was crucial. Oh yeah, plus, the book says that the 4th floor is completely different from what we've seen so far. Some kind of runes or something, Jess said. In that case, there could be 2 lower levels, Paul replied. Well, let's stop thinking about the 4th floor for next time. For now, we'll focus on the 3rd floor, Jess said. What is that book you're talking about? Roxy asked suspiciously. Elise brought it with her. It has notes from a guy who traveled almost to the very bottom of the teleportation labyrinth. You should read it too, Jess replied and handed her the book. Oh, I didn't know such a thing existed. Understood, I'll go over it carefully tomorrow, she replied. Now then, about our information, let's shake things up a bit, Talhand? Jess began. Talhand cleared his throat, as the man most often in the back, who therefore observed the most, was in charge of deciding our formation. Leave it to me, he replied. He stank of alcohol. He always stank of alcohol. Jess also bathed in alcohol at night, but Talhand dedicated himself to knocking over the jars until noon. It will be more or less the same as before, he said. There was a paper on the table with 2 lines drawn on it, along with small stones of different colors. Talhand placed a blue stone first, just like before. Roxy will take the rear. Understood, she nodded. He then placed a gray stone next to the previous one. I will act as Roxy's support, so she doesn't have another accident, so maybe I can stop something before it goes wrong, he said. Very well, she muttered. I could see her looking crestfallen at this comment, but it couldn't be helped. Let's try switching. Elinalize and Paul, you go in front and Elinalize in the back, he said as he moved the red stone that represented Paul forward and the yellow one that represented Elinalize back. You Gino, you will be in front of everyone as the main attacker. Your skills will be necessary for the safety of the entire group, he said, placing a brown stone in front of the others. And Jess, you will be where you were before, he said, placing a black stone far ahead of the rest of the pack. Scout, Jess vanguard, Paul Elinalize and I rear guard, Roxy and Talhand. Any opinions on this? The dwarf asked. I agree, I said, and the others nodded. Well then, we're done with that. Next is the waiting group, Talhand said. After that, Jess quickly gave his orders to the waiting group. He gave Viera a list of supplies to buy and then consulted Shiera about Roxy's condition. He also advised her to prepare the medical supplies she deemed necessary to prepare for Zenith's rescue. Lastly, he entrusted Lilia with the supervision of these tasks. Jess was the leader of the labyrinth group, Lilia was the leader of the waiting group, and Paul was the leader of the group in general. He oversaw all the final decision-making and kept track of everyone. Well then, everyone get ready for 3 days from now. You may leave. At Paul's order, the meeting ended. With Roxy between us, we resumed our exploration of the labyrinth. We moved as planned, heading to the 3rd floor. There were 3 types of enemies, the clay skulls, as well as the giant tarantulas and the iron caterpillars. The giant tarantula stationed in the center posed no problem for me, so I just had to draw my sword and the enemies were cut like butter. I think even I was taking care of most of the monsters alone, but also ours behind us, and those were matters for Roxy and Talhand. Elinalize and Paul now only went for the iron caterpillars. Ugh. Roxy sighed. Once the enemy was completely annihilated, from a distance I could see her staring at me, so I returned her gaze with a smile and a thumbs up. Yeah, she was acting dense on purpose. When we crossed hers, she quickly looked away, blushing completely. I'm about to run out of mana. I'd like to rest, she said. We went back to the main hallway and took a break there. I had barely warmed up, but Roxy is a mage and she actually has more mana than me. I sat on the floor as I cleaned the blood off my sword, and Roxy sat shyly next to me. Sorry to keep you waiting, she muttered. No problem, your application of magic was precise and exceptional, I told her with a smile. She just smiled, blushing as she nodded. I'd like to find the magic circle that leads to the 4th floor soon, Jess muttered, scratching his chin as he looked through the book. A whole day had passed since we went down to the 3rd floor. The author of the book had taken 7 days to get here. We had gotten ahead of that group and had gone through the 3rd floor several times. It was time to find the next circle. Gino, can I borrow your back? Roxy murmured. I could see Elinalize pricked up her ears at this as she glanced at me out of the corner of her eye, as did Paul, but they didn't say anything. Go ahead, I said once I responded. She slumped against me, snuggling up so that her ear was level with my heart. I knew this was her way of flirting, but it could also be because leaning against the wall brought back bad memories for her. Gino? Roxy suddenly called out. Yeah. What's wrong? I replied. I never asked you, but why you here? I assume you came with Miss Elinalize, right? She asked. Yes, I did come with her, and it was because Jess asked me to as a favor. You see, he was a childhood friend who helped me a lot in the past, and now I'm paying my debt with my help. I murmured, I see. She murmured back. Hey, I was thinking, if we are able to rescue Lady Zenith safely and we both have a chance, how about we go into a labyrinth sometime, just the two of us? She asked. I could see Paul grimacing at this. Maybe it's his way of saying you're going too fast. Sure, no problem, I replied. It's a promise, she asked. Yes, a promise, I replied. I couldn't see her expression, but from Paul's face I think she's smiling. I'm starting to feel a little sleepy, I'm going to rest a little, she said as she leaned closer to me. Of course, sleep well, I said, closing my eyes and accepting my fate. Chapter 41 to 60 is ended and next chapter 61 to 80 is processing. Thanks for watching. If you want to suggest me anything, please comment. Thank you. Only true anime and Marvel fans will hit that subscribe button. Are you one of them? Comment on their favorite young adult fantasy audiobooks and check your other videos for more recommendations.